The house, once filled with laughter, was now suffocating in a deadly silence. Coming home from school, Carmen could never have imagined that just a few steps through the door would shatter her entire world. On the bedroom floor, in the cold and narrow space, her 16-year-old daughter, Maria Jesus Troncoso, lay bound and barely breathing. With the last of her strength, Maria whispered a single word, the name of her attacker, Jorge. That final breath did more than break a mother's heart. It ignited a nightmare that spread through the city of Los Angeles, Chile. A murder that shocked the nation, a killer hiding in plain sight, and a question that lingers to this day. How could a girl so full of light and dreams meet such a cruel end? Maria Jesus Troncoso was born on May 22, 2007, in Los Angeles, Chile. She was the younger of two daughters of Carmen Gloria. Her arrival filled the home with joy. Family members celebrated enthusiastically, and her older sister, Camila, was especially excited to welcome her. A few months later, that happiness was overshadowed by her parents' separation. The breakup brought emotional strain and financial difficulties. Even so, Carmen found the strength to carry on, relying on her job as a teacher to support her daughters. Those tough years strengthened their bond, turning them into a united team that faced every challenge together. Over time, sisters Maria and Camila grew closer, sharing interests and hobbies. Together with their mother, they formed an inseparable trio. They often went shopping, watched movies at the cinema, attended concerts, and went on hiking trips. Their connection was more than family. It was a partnership built on love and support. In 2023, their routine changed slightly when Camila moved to another city to study occupational therapy. Though it was only 2 hours away, she couldn't be home during the week. However, every weekend, she returns to Los Angeles to spend time with her mother and younger sister Maria. At 16, Maria was in secondary school. She stood out for her strong academic performance, kindness, involvement in extracurriculars, and eagerness to help others. She had a natural instinct to protect those in need. She often rescued abandoned animals, cared for them, and found people to adopt them. She also joined feminist marches, defending women's rights and speaking out against gender-based violence. Cheerful, outgoing, and affectionate, she was admired for her compassion. On the weekend of October 14 to 15, 2023, Camila visited as usual. She spends time with her family and shares moments with her younger sister Maria. During those days, Maria asked for advice about what to do after finishing school. She was unsure about her career path and even considered following Camila into occupational therapy. It was a conversation like many they'd had before, without knowing it would be their last. The next day, Maria began to complain of stomach pain. The discomfort continued through Tuesday, and by Wednesday evening, she told her mother she didn't want to go to school on Thursday because she felt too unwell and needed to rest. Her mother, Carmen, agreed. Her daughter looked tired and pale. She hoped a day of rest would help. On Thursday morning, October 19, Carmen left for work at 7:30 a.m., going to the school where she taught, about a half-hour drive from their apartment. Maria was still asleep, so they didn't say goodbye. Around 8:30 a.m., Carmen received a text message from Maria asking for money, about $200, to buy clothes for an upcoming school event. The request immediately made her suspicious. Her daughter rarely asked for money for such things, and even asked for it to be transferred immediately. Concerned, Carmen started a video call. What she saw unsettled her. Maria didn't fully show her face, and the camera moved as if someone else were holding it. Her behavior felt off, and when the conversation returned to money, Carmen grew more worried. Carmen explained she didn't have the money at that moment, but Maria insisted she take it from the condominium funds. At the time, Carmen was the treasurer of the residential complex and had access to that account. The insistence and unusual tone deepened her unease. For Carmen, the suggestion to use condominium funds was the final red flag. Her daughter didn't know the balance of that account, and it was unthinkable that she would propose taking money that wasn't theirs. That request was completely contrary to Maria's character and went against the values Carmen had instilled in her daughters. The uneasiness in Carmen's heart kept growing. Trusting her instincts, she asked to leave her school duties and drove straight home. As soon as she walked in, the house felt unnaturally silent. She ran upstairs to the main bedroom, where Maria had spent the morning, opened the door, and was confronted with a devastating scene. Her daughter lay on the floor, wrapped in a blanket between the bed and the nightstand. In a panic, Carmen ran to Maria and found her daughter's hands tied behind her back and her ankles bound. Desperate, she began untying her and shouted for help. Maria was still breathing, but with difficulty, her chest rising and falling unevenly. In her final moments of consciousness, Maria whispered one word, identifying her attacker, Jorge. She then asked her mother to hold her. Carmen's cries for help echoed through the building, but almost no one responded. Only relatives of a man named Jorge Reboledo Martinez, who stayed at a nearby aunt's house, came forward. They were the ones who ultimately called emergency services. Shortly after, Jorge himself arrived, approaching calmly, asking what was happening, and offering help. Carmen, in shock and focused on saving her daughter, did not grasp the importance of the name her child had uttered. Paramedics arrived within minutes and tried to resuscitate Maria for more than half an hour, but they could not save her. Maria, 16, was pronounced dead at the scene. Carabineros officers arrived soon after, secured the area, and began collecting evidence. One fact was clear: Maria had been attacked in her own home. The attacker had either forced entry or been allowed in by someone she trusted. Carmen gave a detailed statement. She explained why her daughter had stayed home, described the strange call and messages, and repeated her daughter's final word. Her initial testimony quickly became a key part of the investigation. Police turned their attention to the man identified as Jorge. Investigators soon learned that Jorge was not a permanent resident. He occasionally stayed in the building with relatives. As they dug deeper, they uncovered his extensive criminal history. He was far from an ordinary neighbor. Shockingly, Jorge had once served in the Carabineros, but was dismissed in 2014 after being arrested by his own colleagues for multiple offenses. In the days after the murder, he was initially questioned as a witness. During interrogation, however, he confessed he had killed Maria. With his confession, he was immediately arrested and placed in preventive detention while the investigation advanced. A deeper review of his past revealed a pattern of violence and crime, convincing investigators that the tragedy in Los Angeles was not an isolated act, but part of long-standing, unchecked behavior. His record included arrests for simple assault, robbery with intimidation, and violent robbery. An officer involved in his previous arrest shared disturbing details. Most of his victims were women, and during a search of his room, police found several women's underwear among his belongings. He had been sentenced to 5 years and 1 day in prison from August 29, 2015 to August 23, 2019, but secured early release in March 2019. Even more troubling, he later managed to erase his criminal record, leaving no official trace of his convictions. After his release, he maintained what authorities called an irreproachable conduct record, a technicality that allowed him to avoid scrutiny from neighbors and community leaders. In his initial statement about Maria's murder, Jorge gave a chilling account. On the morning of October 19, 2023, He entered through the front door, went straight to the kitchen to take a knife, and then headed upstairs to the main bedroom. There he encounters 16 years old Maria, shocked and terrified. Maria froze when she saw him. He threatened her with the knife and demanded money. Maria gave Jorge everything she had, 20,000 Chilean pesos in cash, about $20. Jorge said it wasn't enough. When she insisted she had no more, he tied her hands and feet and forced her to call her mother to demand additional money. Because Maria couldn't hold the phone, Jorge held it for her. That explains why, during the video call, Carmen couldn't clearly see her daughter's face and why the camera moved oddly. When Carmen refused to send money, Jorge became enraged. He ended the call and attacked Maria with such brutality that her injuries proved fatal. Realizing she was dying, he took the cash, a gold ring, and her phone. He later confessed to throwing the knife into a nearby river to destroy evidence. Divers recovered a knife, matching the description, which was sent to the forensic lab for analysis and comparison with Maria's wounds. For her family, the loss was devastating. On Friday, October 27, relatives, classmates, friends, teachers, and even strangers gathered to say goodbye. The funeral was filled with grief and a collective demand for justice. Her sister, Camila, emerged as a leading voice for accountability. She questioned how an alleged robbery could end in such a cruel killing. After his arrest, Jorge cooperated with investigators, handing over the clothes he wore that day and providing biological samples for comparison with evidence from the crime scene. Jorge was formally charged with robbery with homicide, and a court ordered his preventive detention during the ongoing investigation. Authorities set a 5-month investigation period, with a hearing scheduled for March 2024. Meanwhile, Maria's friends launched an online campaign calling for the harshest penalty, life imprisonment without parole or early release. The campaign gained traction, fueled by public anger over perceived failures in the justice system. Many asked, if this was only a robbery, why murder a teenager so mercilessly? Investigators did not rule out that Jorge had been watching the family's home. It was known in the neighborhood that only women lived there, which may have made them seem like an easy target. On November 3, 2023, the first march demanding justice for Maria took place, organized by her family. It was the start of a series of demonstrations over the following months, all echoing the same message: justice delayed is justice denied. After Jorge's arrest, the legal process became a nightmare for Maria's family. Progress was far slower than they expected. The March hearing never happened. Delay tactics by the defense pushed the first hearing to June 26, forcing the family to wait months just to begin the trial. Camila keeps the memory of her younger sister Maria alive through social media posts, interviews, and constant participation in protests. Each month, on the anniversary of the murder, she shared tributes and raised awareness. Her goal was clear: to secure a life sentence for the man who shattered their family. On May 22, 2024, the family marked what would have been Marie's 17th birthday, a painful day used to honor her kindness, solidarity, and compassion. Around that time, a mural was painted in her memory during a public event, turning her legacy into a symbol of resilience for the community. Meanwhile, the judicial process continued to move slowly. At a hearing to review precautionary measures, the judge maintained Jorge's preventive detention. The prosecutor's office requested 15 more days to complete the investigation, another delay that tested the family's endurance. During that session, Maria's relatives and friends gathered outside the courthouse with banners demanding justice. In August 2024, the lead prosecutor announced that the state would seek the maximum penalty under Chilean law, qualified life imprisonment, which would keep Jorge in prison without the possibility of early release. The prosecution also disclosed its case plan: 30 witnesses, both civilians and police, and 6 forensic experts would testify to reconstruct the events. As the months passed, preparations advanced for the oral trial, scheduled to begin on December 26, 2024. Just as the family felt close to confronting Jorge in court, another setback occurred. The December 26 hearing was postponed to January 6, 2025. Again, at the defense's request. For Camila and her mother, the delay was unbearable. After more than 10 months of emotional preparation to face the man responsible for Maria's death, they were told to wait yet again. Camila spoke publicly, condemning what she saw as a defense strategy indifferent to their suffering. For her and her mother, each delay was not merely legal maneuvering, it prolonged their pain and reinforced the feeling that justice remained out of reach. Throughout the process, Maria's family sought not only justice in her case, but also broader reforms. They supported legislative proposals to impose harsher penalties on violent offenders. Lawmakers even began drafting the Maria Jesus Troncoso Law, inspired by her case. The bill aimed to strengthen punishments and prevent offenders from obtaining early release or sentence reductions. As Jorge had previously done, it also sought tougher penalties for non-intimate femicides, cases in which a man murders a woman with whom he has no romantic, familial, or cohabiting relationship. Maria and Jorge had no prior connection, and her death exposed a legal gap that many felt left women unprotected. Advocates argued that existing penalties were too lenient, and the proposed law aimed to fix that. By September 2025, the bill's passage in Congress was still uncertain. Meanwhile, the long-awaited trial began on January 6, 2025. Over 10 days, the tribunal heard from 33 witnesses, reviewed forensic analyses, and examined the evidence gathered by prosecutors. Key evidence included Maria's personal belongings recovered from Jorge's home, and DNA found on his clothing that matched her genetic profile. Additional evidence came from geolocation data linked to Maria's cell phone, reported missing by Carmen, and later found in Jorge's possession. Surveillance footage placed him near the residence. Most damaging was his own confession. The defense tried to exclude it, claiming constitutional violations, but the court ruled the confession valid. The defense also tried to downgrade the charges to simple robbery, with violence followed by homicide. The tribunal rejected that argument, concluding the murder occurred during the robbery itself. The crime was therefore classified as robbery with homicide. After more than 15 months of waiting, the court delivered its verdict. Jorge Rebolledo Martinez was sentenced to qualified life imprisonment. This sentence requires at least 40 years in prison before he becomes eligible for any form of release. With no alternative sentences or early benefits, he was also permanently barred from holding public office or any official role and lost his political rights for life. For Carmen, the sentence could not heal the wound. She acknowledged that no ruling could bring back her daughter or erase the pain. Still, the decision offered a measure of relief, a formal recognition that justice had finally been served. The murder of Maria left a profound mark on her family and the community. Her case resonated far beyond Los Angeles, Chile, as a stark reminder of the dangers women continue to face and the urgent need for stronger protections. The car had gone off the road and landed in a ditch. At first, it was quiet, but then smoke began to rise. Inside, a woman wasn't moving. Her husband stood outside, simply watching. He didn't call for help. Malcolm John Webster was born on April 18, 1959, in Wandsworth, Greater London. On the surface, his background appeared stable, even enviable. His father, Alexander Robertson Webster, held a high, ranking position within the Metropolitan Police, serving as a detective chief superintendent in the fraud squad. His mother, Odette Blewett, had once worked as a nurse but gave up her profession to raise their children behind closed doors. However, the family home was governed by unrelenting discipline and an unsettling set of rules. Alexander ran the household with absolute control. When he used the bathroom, everyone else had to vacate the house. Meals were taken in silence unless he initiated a conversation. Emotional warmth was rare, and affection was nearly absent. Major family decisions, including financial matters, were handled solely by Alexander. From an early age, Malcolm displayed troubling signs. While his twin sister, Caroline, easily made friends, Malcolm struggled to connect, but rather than withdraw quietly, he developed unusual ways of attracting attention. He began pretending to faint, often collapsing at convenient moments to avoid chores or responsibilities. His apparent health issues led to speculative diagnoses, ranging from asthma to epilepsy. Yet, no solid medical explanation was ever confirmed. Doctors prescribed medications based on symptoms, never seeking a definitive cause. As sympathy began to fade, Malcolm escalated his attention, seeking behavior. He became fascinated with fire, setting small blazes in school and earning the nickname Pyro from classmates. Though these incidents never resulted in formal charges, they left other parents uneasy. Children were warned to stay away from him, and isolation became his norm. At home, comparisons with his more sociable sister only deepened his resentment. His parents, hoping to give him a fresh start, enrolled him in a private boys' school. Initially, Malcolm appeared to flourish. He joined the drama club, improved his grades, and reinvented himself. He claimed his family was wealthy and well-connected, but his lies eventually caught up with him, and once again, trust in him eroded. At 15, Malcolm was pulled out of school. He didn't resist. Education no longer interested him. He wanted independence and income. In his early career, he struggled to find work he enjoyed. He drifted from job to job, including garbage collection, fruit picking, and retail. But none of these roles gave him a sense of purpose or satisfaction. At 17, guided by his mother, Malcolm began training as a nurse. Surprisingly, he thrived and began a serious relationship, which ended suddenly due to a terminated pregnancy and the resulting emotional distress. However, Malcolm persevered. When he was 30, Malcolm worked in Tawam Hospital, on the children's ward in Abu Dhabi, UAE. It was here that his criminal tendencies surfaced. Trusted by elderly residents, he volunteered to manage their finances, only to siphon off their savings for personal luxuries, including rounds of drinks and expensive golf equipment. When that scam lost steam, he shifted tactics. He started targeting older, wealthier women. His charm was disarming, and his lies were convincing. Posing as a struggling young man with tales of hardship, he extracted money and gifts with calculated precision. In the late 1980s, within months, 3 children with special needs died under his care. Each suffered sudden cardiac arrests. There were no signs of illness beforehand, no medical warning signs. Though no autopsies were conducted, whispers began circulating among the staff. But in a region where autopsies were culturally discouraged, no investigations followed. Malcolm simply left the country without consequences. Back in the UK, he resumed his life as though nothing had happened. He found work as a nurse and began cultivating his social image once more. At a party, he met a woman named Claire Morris. She was born on December 26, 1961, just 2 years after Malcolm. She grew up in a secure, affluent household and had a younger brother named Peter Morris. Claire was the kind of person who lit up a room, outgoing, confident, and full of energy. She was popular because of her lively personality. One evening, she met Malcolm at a party, and he was immediately drawn to her charm. Claire represented everything he admired: warmth, vitality, and a strong sense of self. The two struck up a conversation and quickly began spending time together. On the surface, their relationship progressed naturally, but beneath the surface, doubts quietly stirred. Claire's mother, Betty Morris, had reservations from the beginning. There was something about Malcolm that didn't sit right with her. Though she couldn't quite articulate it, her instincts whispered caution. Peter, on the other hand, initially welcomed Malcolm into the family, finding him clever and polite, perhaps a bit of a rogue, but nothing more. From Malcolm's perspective, Claire was radiant. His twin sister Caroline described Claire as generous and kind-hearted, someone who brought genuine happiness into her brother's life. Even Odette, Malcolm's emotionally distant mother, spoke positively of her. For once, it seemed Malcolm had found a partner who might steer his life in the right direction. They married on September 3rd, 1993. The ceremony was beautiful. Claire looked radiant, and Malcolm performed his role to perfection. The devoted husband, charming and attentive. Friends and family left the celebration believing they had a bright future ahead of them. Young, in love, and financially stable. Everything appeared idyllic, but everything changed just 9 months later. On May 27, 1994, tragedy struck. Malcolm and Claire had been driving along a quiet rural road, with Malcolm at the wheel and Claire beside him. According to his account, a motorcyclist suddenly appeared on the wrong side of the road, forcing him to swerve. He claimed to have overcorrected, sending the vehicle into a ditch. Moments later, the car burst into flames. Malcolm escaped. Claire did not. He was taken to hospital and kept under observation for a week. He complained of pain, appeared emotionally broken, and wore a neck brace. But scans and medical tests showed no significant injuries. There were no broken bones, no burns, and no smoke inhalation. His physical condition was inconsistent with the violent wreckage he described. At Claire's funeral, Malcolm appeared inconsolable, barely able to speak. Peter held his hand throughout the ceremony, unaware that the man he was comforting would later spend Claire's life insurance payout, £200,000 British pound, an enormous sum in 1994 on a £30,000 British pound yacht, a new Range Rover, and other lavish expenses. The money vanished quickly. Questions began to surface. Why hadn't Claire managed to escape the car, as Malcolm had investigators confirmed that while the car had veered off the road, the crash hadn't been severe. It wasn't traveling at high speed, and the damage didn't suggest a violent impact. The fire's origin remained unknown. Even more troubling was that when Malcolm phoned for help, he told dispatchers the vehicle was empty. Despite his wife being inside, he never mentioned Claire. Despite these troubling details, no formal charges were ever brought. The case was closed, and Malcolm's life continued undisturbed by suspicion. Behind the scenes, he had already moved on. Soon after Claire's death, Malcolm began a secret affair with Geraldine Oakley, a hospital IT manager. Publicly, he was a grieving widower trying to rebuild his life. Privately, Geraldine began noticing unusual behavior. Malcolm talked about Claire's death in unsettlingly clinical terms, often circling back to whether a second autopsy would be ordered. His cold fascination with the topic disturbed her deeply. Geraldine confided her concerns to a consultant pathologist. She feared there was more to Claire's death than anyone realized. Eventually, unable to reconcile her suspicions with their relationship, Geraldine walked away. Unfazed, Malcolm shifted locations once again. By 1995, he was living in Saudi Arabia. There, he connected with a woman named Brenda Grant over the phone. They eventually met in person a few times, but the friendship ended abruptly when, according to Brenda, Malcolm offered her illegal substances, an offer she firmly declined. After his stay in Saudi Arabia, Malcolm relocated once more, this time crossing hemispheres entirely and settling in New Zealand in the mid-1990s. No longer working as a nurse, he presented himself as a computer specialist. At a dinner party that month, he met Felicity Drum, a bright, outgoing cancer nurse. She was intelligent, well-spoken, and 3 years younger than Malcolm. Her personality was magnetic, polished, lively, and full of warmth. For a man like Malcolm, she was the perfect mark. He played the role to perfection, attentive, affectionate, and emotionally present. To Felicity, he seemed sensitive and grounded, often speaking of life's fragility and how important it was not to waste time. Within months, they were inseparable. By January 1997, Malcolm had proposed. They married that April in Auckland, and for their honeymoon, they retreated to the idyllic Bay of Islands. But amid the calm beaches and scenic beauty, a far darker undercurrent began to emerge. Felicity later recounted one disturbing episode from the trip. She drank a cup of tea, prepared by Malcolm, and fell into a deep, unnatural sleep that lasted nearly 36 hours. It wasn't a one-off. In the months that followed, she experienced troubling health issues, double vision, unsteadiness, periods of confusion, and extended bouts of sleep, all suspiciously occurring after eating or drinking something provided by her husband. When she raised her concerns, Malcolm dismissed them as stress-related. Doctors were consulted, but none could pinpoint the cause. Tests showed abnormal liver function, usually associated with substance abuse or medication toxicity, neither of which applied to Felicity, who lived a healthy lifestyle. Still, Malcolm continued preparing all her meals, always at her side, always in control. Their home life soon took on a sinister pattern. Fires began to follow them. One broke out at Felicity's parents' house while the couple was staying there, another at a rental cottage, and a third at a property they were considering purchasing. These accidents left Felicity uneasy, but she brushed them off until Malcolm encouraged her to take out a life insurance policy. She agreed. In 1998, they welcomed a son. From the outside, it looked like a happy family. Malcolm was attentive, affectionate, and often seen doting on his child, but his affection masked a growing deception. In early 1999, Felicity and Malcolm planned to purchase a home in Auckland. Malcolm repeatedly stalled the payment, claiming the funds from a UK bank transfer hadn't cleared. As the February 12th deadline approached, the pressure mounted. That day, Malcolm and Felicity headed to the bank together. During the drive, Malcolm began complaining about the car's steering. Then, without warning, the vehicle veered across 2 lanes and slammed into a ditch. Felicity grabbed the wheel in panic and found it responsive. Nothing about the car's handling felt off. Malcolm got out of the car and asked her to stay put. However, she disobeyed and got out to call the bank, probably to reschedule their meeting. Just a week after the crash, Malcolm arranged a picnic in a remote area. During the drive, the couple argued, nothing major. Then, in an apparent peace offering, Malcolm handed her a bottle of water. Moments later, Felicity passed out. She awoke hours later in the passenger seat, disoriented and groggy. The car was now deep within a forest. Her phone rang. It was her father, worried after not hearing from her. When Malcolm returned to the car and saw her awake, he looked startled, alarmed even. He climbed into the car, tense, and asked how she had managed to regain consciousness. Felicity didn't know. Her head spun. Her memory was foggy, but one thing was clear. Something was terribly wrong. She demanded he take her home immediately. Back at the house, with her senses returning, she started asking questions. Why had they been in the middle of the forest? What had caused her to pass out? Malcolm dodged her inquiries. Then he suddenly clutched his chest and claimed he might be having a heart attack. He rushed off, allegedly heading to the hospital. Hours later, he returned with an astonishing announcement. Doctors had diagnosed him with leukemia, but this was no cry for help. It was a distraction. Felicity's father had already harbored suspicions about his son-in-law. After speaking to the family solicitor, Felicity's father began investigating Malcolm's finances. What he found changed everything. Together, father and daughter searched through Malcolm's belongings and discovered a key to a private mailbox. Inside were damning documents. A bank statement showed that Malcolm had secretly moved 140,000 New Zealand dollars from a joint account into a personal one in Aberdeenshire. Credit card bills revealed he was drowning in debt. Felicity's father took immediate action, securing a court injunction that legally barred Malcolm from the family home. By the time it was served, Malcolm had vanished. He fled New Zealand just as Felicity began to uncover the full scope of the betrayal. Medical tests later confirmed what she had feared. Her body contained dangerously high levels of sedatives, drugs she had never knowingly taken. Once Malcolm was gone, the symptoms vanished as if they'd never existed. The man she had loved, trusted, and married had slowly and methodically poisoned her. Her suspicions, once only instinct, had now hardened into certainty. While searching through their shared email account, Felicity uncovered damning messages to a UK estate agent. Malcolm had been posing as a single father, planning a quiet relocation to Cornwall with their son. He was arranging to move by the end of 1999. He arranged to move out at the end of 1999. Not a word of this was shared with Felicity. Then came a discovery that changed everything. In the boot of the car Malcolm had abandoned, she found a petrol canister. It was the final piece. A horrifying realization dawned. He had intended to replicate the exact circumstances of his first wife, Claire's death. The plan had almost succeeded until her father's well-timed phone call had inadvertently saved her life. Felicity now understood the forest, the unconsciousness, the steering failure, the sedatives. It had all been part of a carefully rehearsed script. She managed to confront Malcolm once. Calmly, she told him she knew what he had tried to do. His reply chilled her to the bone. "You would have died happy." That sentence shattered any lingering doubts. Malcolm hadn't just deceived and manipulated her. He had plotted her death with methodical precision. For Felicity, the illusion was destroyed. She now knew she had married a murderer. She went straight to the police. In July 2000, New Zealand authorities issued 4 arrest warrants against Malcolm Webster. The charges were severe, including arson, drugging his wife, and administering substances with intent to cause harm. But Malcolm was already gone, having fled the country before he could face justice. From that point on, he was officially a wanted man. As the investigation unfolded, more details emerged. Felicity had only been aware of one life insurance policy, but Malcolm had secretly forged 8 more, with a combined value nearing $2 million New Zealand dollars. His motivation had always been clear: control, deception, and financial gain, no matter the cost. What he did next was true to form. In 2000, Malcolm slipped back into the United Kingdom. He confessed nothing to his family and resumed life as if nothing had happened. He found work, played the role of a respectable man, and once again sought out wealthy women. In August 2004, he met Simone Banerjee at a hospital. He worked in nurse administration. She managed the surgical theater. The two soon became a couple. By 2006, they were engaged. To Simone, Malcolm was a sensitive soul. He shared stories about his supposed battle with leukemia, disappearing for hours and claiming he'd been undergoing treatment. He told her of his tragic past, including the accidental death of his first wife, Claire. He even claimed certain television scenes, fires, car crashes were too traumatic to watch. Simone believed him. She had no idea he was still legally married to Felicity Drum, or that he was a fugitive in New Zealand, or that he had already tried to murder 2 women. But police hadn't stopped tracking him and found him living openly in Aberdeen under his real name. Simone might never have learned the truth had authorities not contacted her directly, warning her of the grave danger she was in. At first, she refused to believe it, but when she confronted Malcolm, he turned pale, packed a bag, mumbled an apology, and walked out. Malcolm Webster was arrested in July 2007 in Scotland. The investigation, known as Operation Field, became an international effort involving over 1,000 witness interviews across multiple countries. Prosecutors charged him with the murder of Claire Morris, the attempted murder of Felicity Drum, and attempting to marry Simone Banerjee under false pretenses to gain access to her estate. As part of the reopened case, Claire's body was exhumed. Forensic analysis revealed that, like Felicity, she had been heavily sedated before her death. This confirmed what many had suspected. Claire hadn't been able to escape the burning car because Malcolm had drugged her, incapacitating her. It was also revealed that Felicity was drugged, even while she was pregnant with their son. The trial would go down in Scottish legal history. It became the longest trial involving a single defendant the country had ever seen. In May 2011, Malcolm Webster was found guilty on all charges. On July 5, 2011, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. Simone later described herself as lucky to be alive. The courtroom testimonies painted a portrait of a man who used trust as a weapon, staging car crashes, setting fires, poisoning those closest to him, and weaving webs of lies for profit. Psychologists diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder, manipulative, deceitful, and utterly lacking in empathy. Even after his conviction, Malcolm refused to accept responsibility. In December 2013, he applied to the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, hoping to have his sentence overturned. The process dragged on, but in February 2016, his request was officially rejected. The High Court saw no grounds for an appeal. After a comprehensive investigation into the events of Malcolm Webster's life, the authorities discovered that he had carried out a series of systematic and calculated crimes, mainly for financial gain, through fraud and murder. The investigation, known as Operation Field, spanned 5 years and involved interviews with more than 1,000 witnesses across several countries, revealing a terrifying pattern of manipulation. Malcolm poisoned his first wife, Claire Morris, with temazepam before staging a car crash in 1994 to collect $200,000 in insurance money, spending lavishly on a yacht and a Range Rover. He continued to poison his second wife, Felicity Drum, even when she was pregnant, and forged 9 insurance policies worth $750,000 while also setting 3 fires at her parents' home, a rented house, and a property he intended to buy. Authorities also discovered that Malcolm had attempted to enter into a sham marriage with Simone Banerjee to gain her wealth, with plans to drown her in a boat accident. He also had other relationships, including with Christina Willis, Anne Hancock, and a 15-year-old girl who ended up having an abortion, all of which he either deceived or exploited financially. In Abu Dhabi, Malcolm was suspected of injecting insulin to kill 3 children in his care, although evidence was lacking due to a culture that discouraged autopsies. He had lied about having cancer as a teenager, foreshadowing a decades-long scam. After his arrest in 2007, a search of Simone's home revealed stolen laptops and unlicensed guns. Malcolm was convicted in 2011 of murder, attempted murder, arson, burglary, fraud, poisoning, and attempted marriage fraud, removed from the nursing register in 2013, and attacked in prison, where he hired a hitman to protect him. These revelations exposed a manipulative psychopath diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder who showed no remorse even after being sentenced to life in prison. Malcolm Webster is currently serving his life sentence at a prison in Lanarkshire, Scotland. Caitlin Coons first met Jonathan Jones when she was only 15 years old, and he was 30. Their relationship would soon spiral into something deeply troubling. Caitlin, who had spent much of her young life in Ohio's foster care system, she was living in a group home in Canton when she first encountered Jonathan. She had faced numerous challenges throughout her childhood, bouncing between foster families and care facilities. She desperately seeking stability and someone who would truly care for her. Like many children in state custody, she had experienced multiple placements, each bringing its own disappointments. These constant moves had left her feeling abandoned, creating deep emotional wounds that made her vulnerable. Caitlin couldn't help but hope that each new placement would provide the loving, stable environment she craved, but these hopes were repeatedly dashed. Jonathan, 15 years her senior, seemed to offer the attention and affection that Caitlin had been searching for. However, their relationship was far from appropriate or legal. At 30, Jonathan was a grown man who should have known better than to pursue a romantic relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Caitlin couldn't help but be drawn to someone who appeared to understand her struggles and offered her the emotional connection she had been craving. What she didn't realize was that she was becoming involved with a predatory man who would ultimately lead her down a dark and destructive path. As their relationship developed, it became increasingly clear that Jonathan was taking advantage of Caitlin's vulnerable state. Caitlin's unstable past made her emotionally vulnerable, and she became dependent on Jonathan, who took advantage of her youth and desire for love. Jonathan manipulated Caitlin by exploiting her weaknesses. He told her she was mature, different, and their relationship was special. These tactics are commonly used by predators to make victims feel responsible for their own exploitation. Jonathan had complete control, and Caitlin became isolated, making it difficult for her to see that she was being manipulated and believe their relationship was genuine. Even though there were clear warning signs, her longing for love and inexperience with healthy relationships blinded her to the fact that she was being victimized. She saw Jonathan as her rescuer, the one finally giving her the love she desired. In March 2023, Jonathan's predatory behavior was exposed when he was convicted of enticing a child to view adult material and child endangerment. The court found that he had engaged in intimate with 15-year-old Caitlin and planned to sell photographs of their encounters. This revealed the extent of his exploitation and abuse. After the conviction, the court had ordered him to stay away from Caitlin and put a GPS tracker on him to monitor his location. Despite these efforts, tragedy was unavoidable. Nicole Jones, Jonathan's 53-year-old mother, lived in Sylvania Township. She was very worried about her son's relationship with the teenage girl, Caitlin. She was concerned about Jonathan's legal problems and the negative impact the relationship was having on both of them. As a caring mother, Nicole had seen her adult son making increasingly bad choices. She had tried to support him, but his relationship with a teenager and the resulting legal issues were almost too much to bear. Nicole felt stuck between her love for her son and her duty to protect a vulnerable young girl. The seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of Jonathan's actions made her even more anxious. As a mother, Nicole had always tried to see the best in Jonathan, even when his behavior was clearly problematic. However, his relationship with Caitlin represented a new level of concern. The teenage girl was undeniably vulnerable and traumatized, and Jonathan appeared to be exploiting someone who needed protection. Nicole felt a sense of responsibility, not only for her son's actions, but also for Caitlin's welfare. She had repeatedly talked to Jonathan about the inappropriate nature of his relationship, pointing out the age difference and legal ramifications. She remained steadfast in her belief that Jonathan needed to end the relationship and seek help for the issues driving him to pursue someone so young and vulnerable. In April 2023, despite the court order, Caitlin made the fateful decision to leave her foster care placement in Canton. The 17-year-old girl, still deeply attached to Jonathan, couldn't resist what she believed was love. She met Jonathan at a local restaurant, and together they returned to his mother's home in Sylvania Township. Caitlin hoped this reunion would somehow make everything better, that they could find a way to be together without further problems. Nicole didn't know that Caitlin was secretly living in her house. Caitlin had climbed in through Jonathan's bedroom window and was hiding from Nicole. This created a stressful and difficult situation, as Caitlin was living a secret life in Nicole's home, where Nicole was trying to live normally. This situation put a strain on everyone. Nicole was unaware of everything happening in her own home, and it was becoming harder to keep Caitlin hidden. Caitlin had to stay quiet during the day and avoid being seen. Caitlin grew frustrated with the secrecy and the constant fear of being discovered, and she realized that this situation couldn't last. As days passed, the strain of keeping Caitlin's presence hidden became increasingly difficult. Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before his mother discovered Caitlin's presence, and he knew his mother would not approve. It was evident that Nicole was genuinely concerned about both Jonathan's welfare and Caitlin's. However, her attempts to intervene and protect them would ultimately put her in grave danger. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Caitlin became convinced that Nicole was the primary obstacle to her being with Jonathan. Warped by trauma and manipulation, Caitlin was unable to see that Nicole's concerns were legitimate and protective. Instead, she viewed Nicole as an enemy, deliberately trying to destroy her relationship. This perception fueled increasingly dark thoughts about how to eliminate the perceived obstacle. On April 19, 2023, Caitlin's frustration and desperation reached a dangerous crescendo. She made a decision that would forever change multiple lives. Caitlin gave Jonathan an ultimatum that was both shocking and terrifying in its cold calculation. Jonathan had 5 hours to kill his own mother, Nicole, or she would end their relationship forever. This demand was so extreme and disturbing that it revealed the depth of Caitlin's psychological disturbance and the toxic nature of their relationship. Jonathan, faced with this impossible choice, found himself paralyzed by fear and indecision. Although he had made numerous poor choices in his life, including his predatory relationship with Caitlin, the prospect of murdering his own mother was apparently beyond even his moral boundaries. As the 5-hour deadline approached, Jonathan could not bring himself to harm the woman who had given him life and had tried to help him throughout his struggles. Caitlin wanted Jonathan to kill Nicole. When he refused, she gave him an extra hour, hoping he would change his mind. But Jonathan still didn't act. So, Caitlin decided she would kill Nicole herself. She believed that for her relationship with Jonathan to work, Nicole had to die. Despite feeling troubled and pressured, she resolved to commit the murder since Jonathan wouldn't. On the evening of April 19th, 2023, Nicole Jones stood in her kitchen, facing her refrigerator. Unbeknownst to her, Caitlin was outside and had found a large rock. Caitlin brought the rock inside, intending to use it as a weapon. Nicole continued her usual evening routine, completely unaware that Caitlin was about to end her life in a shocking and violent way. Her kitchen, normally a place of comfort, was about to become the scene of a brutal crime. As Nicole stood, with her back turned, focused on whatever she was retrieving from the refrigerator, Caitlin approached from behind with the rock in her hands. In a moment of pure evil and violence, Caitlin began bludgeoning Nicole over the head with the rock, striking her multiple times with brutal force. The attack was swift and merciless, giving Nicole no opportunity to defend herself or even understand what was happening. As if the bludgeoning wasn't enough to ensure Nicole's death, Caitlin then strangled her, making certain that she would never again interfere in her relationship with Jonathan. Jonathan was in the living room when his girlfriend, Caitlin, murdered his mother in the kitchen. Instead of calling for help or trying to save her, Jonathan chose to help Caitlin hide the crime. This decision made him an accomplice in a shocking murder case. They worked together to dispose of Nicole's body. They drove to 2 local stores, purchasing a tarp and garbage bags to wrap Nicole's lifeless body. They returned to the house and wrapped Nicole's body in the materials they had purchased. After wrapping the body, Jonathan and Caitlin loaded Nicole into the trunk. In perhaps one of the most disturbing details of this case, prosecutors later revealed that Jonathan and Caitlin actually went out to dinner while Nicole's body remained in the trunk. Following their dinner, they drove to a nearby apartment complex and disposed of Nicole's body in a dumpster, treating her as mere garbage to be discarded. The dumpster was collected the following day as part of the normal garbage pickup, and Nicole's body was taken to a landfill. Even though law enforcement searched thoroughly, Nicole's body was never found. This prevents her family from having the closure they would get from a proper burial. With Nicole's body disposed of, Jonathan and Caitlin decided to flee the area to avoid prosecution. They took Nicole's 2021 Buick Encore and began driving west, eventually crossing the border into Mexico. Along with the car, they also took Nicole's social security card, identification, credit cards, and health insurance card, essentially stealing her identity along with her life. However, their escape was short-lived. Caitlin, perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of her actions, made a critical error that would lead to their capture. While on the run, she contacted one of her caregivers and confessed to the murder, admitting that she had killed Jonathan's mother. This confession prompted the caregiver to immediately contact law enforcement, who began working with U.S. Marshals to track down Jonathan and Caitlin. The search for Jonathan and Caitlin became an international manhunt, with law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border cooperating to locate them. Fortunately for investigators, Jonathan was still wearing the Jeep's tracking device, mandated as part of his earlier conviction. This device allowed authorities to track their movements and ultimately locate them in the municipality of Ahumada, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, on May 8, 2023, approximately 3 weeks after Nicole's murder. U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities successfully apprehended both Jonathan and Caitlin. They were found in possession of Nicole's vehicle and personal documents, providing further evidence of their guilt. Jonathan and Caitlin was extradited back to the United States to face charges for their roles in Nicole's brutal murder. Before, back in Ohio, law enforcement had been conducting a thorough investigation into Nicole's disappearance and presumed death. The investigation had begun on May 5, 2023, when Canton police contacted Sylvania Township Police requesting a welfare check on Nicole Jones. When officers arrived at her condominium, they were unable to locate her despite conducting a thorough search of the premises. As the investigation unfolded, the true horror of what had transpired became clear. Detective Jake Albright of the Sylvania Township Police Department interviewed Caitlin extensively after her arrest, and she provided detailed confessions about how she had murdered Nicole. The case against both Caitlin and Jonathan was overwhelming. In addition to Caitlin's confessions, investigators had Jeep's tracking data from Jonathan's ankle monitor that corroborated the timeline of events and their movements after the murder. Surveillance footage from the stores where they purchased supplies further supported the prosecution's case against them. Initially, prosecutors charged Caitlin with aggravated murder, abuse of a corpse, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Given the serious nature of the charges and the calculated manner in which the crime was committed, the court decided to charge Caitlin as an adult. Despite her being only 17 at the time of the murder, Jonathan faced even more charges, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, felonious assault, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. However, as the case moved through the legal system, both defendants ultimately decided to accept plea agreements rather than face trial. On June 4, 2024, both Caitlin Coons, now 18, and Jonathan Jones, 33, appeared in Lucas County Common Police Court before Judge. They each pleaded no contest to charges of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to dismiss the remaining charges against both defendants. The judge sentenced each of them to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. While this sentence ensures that both will spend decades behind bars, it also means that they could potentially be released while still relatively young, a thought that brings little comfort to Nicole's grieving family. During the sentencing hearing, the impact of Nicole's murder on her family became painfully clear. Nicole's brother, Robert Jones, who is the administrator of her estate, spoke about the devastating effect her loss has had on their family. Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates addressed the case following the sentencing, acknowledging the horror of what had transpired and expressing hope that the resolution would bring some measure of peace to Nicole's family. She said, "This was a horrific event." In her statement, they are relieved to reach a resolution in this case. They hope this brings some measure of peace to Nicole Jones's family. May her memory forever live in their hearts. As a result of this case, Robert Jones, representing Nicole's estate, has filed a civil lawsuit against Caitlin and Jonathan for wrongful death. The lawsuit seeks $25,000 in damages, in addition to punitive damages and other expenses. The suit acknowledges that no amount of money can truly make up for Nicole's death and the way it occurred. A tragic part of this case is that Nicole's body has never been found. Her family has been deprived of the fundamental right to give her a proper burial and have a place to remember and honor her. Not knowing where Nicole's remains are located intensifies their suffering. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from predatory relationships and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Caitlin, who began as a victim of Jonathan's inappropriate pursuit when she was just 15, ultimately became a perpetrator of one of the most brutal murders imaginable. While this transformation does not excuse her actions, it highlights the complex dynamics that can develop when adults prey upon children who are already struggling with trauma and instability. The residents of Sylvania Township, especially those in Nicole's condominium complex, were deeply disturbed by the terrible crime. Many residents are elderly and had moved there because they thought it was a safe and peaceful place to live. The shocking murder of their neighbor by her son and his teenage girlfriend destroyed their feeling of safety and showed that violence can happen anywhere, even in quiet communities. As this case comes to a close with the sentencing of both perpetrators, Nicole Jones's family continues to struggle with their immense loss. It was evident to everyone that Nicole Jones was a caring mother who had tried to protect both her son and the teenage girl her son was exploiting. Her concern for their welfare ultimately cost her life as she became the victim of a crime so brutal and senseless that it continues to shock all who learn about it. Sydney Sutherland was born in Grubbs, Arkansas, to a humble, close-knit family. The youngest of 3 children, she has an extremely close relationship with her mother, Maggie. Their relationship was incredibly close. They spoke daily, shared every detail of their lives, and supported each other fully. It is this deep relationship that has helped shape Sydney's personality, making her a warm, approachable, and empathetic person. She is very good at studying, but always maintains a humble attitude and values discipline. These qualities make her trustworthy in the eyes of everyone. From a young age, Sydney showed a strong desire to help people, so her decision to pursue a career in nursing came as no surprise. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in a medical program and started working at Harris Medical Center. Not only does she provide attentive care, she also brings comfort and optimism to those around her with her very presence. Sydney also had a full and fulfilling personal life outside of work. She lived with her partner, Alex, loved her dogs, doted on her nephews and nieces, and treasured family traditions. A physically active lifestyle was important to her, as exercise helped her manage stress and stay balanced. In August 2020, she and her family had a memorable vacation in Florida, participating in activities such as swimming, hiking, and enjoying warm moments together. But no one expected that it would be the last time they would live their familiar life. Sydney returned home, feeling refreshed and ready to resume her routine. Quake Llewellyn is a lifelong resident of Jackson County. Living just a few miles from the town of Grubbs, he was born into a farming family, owned a lot of land, and was respected by the community. His family was renowned for their honesty, hard work, and had been honored with the prestigious Farm Family of the Year title in 2016. From a young age, he worked on the family farm, handling machinery, managing daily tasks, and helping during busy seasons. To others, Quake's life appeared uneventful and free of issues. He does not violate the law, does not complain, or exhibit any concerning behavior. He's quiet, keeps to himself, and does not cause any trouble. Neighbors described him as a reserved person, a loner, perhaps, who never sought attention. This lack of warning signals made him seem harmless, but it was a dangerous illusion. On a hot day in August 2020, Sydney and Quake's paths had yet to cross. Their lives moved in parallel, hers filled with connection, care, and trust, his with solitude, farming, and silence. The only thing they had in common was living in a small town where everyone thought they knew each other. No one expected their lives to intersect in such an unexpected way. August 19, 2020, began as an ordinary day. Sydney drove to Jonesboro for a gym session with her personal trainer. The workout lasted about an hour. Security cameras captured her returning home, getting out of her car, packing her things, entering the house, and leaving shortly afterwards. She appeared composed and energetic, wearing athletic gear. With no signs of fatigue, Sydney then stopped at her mother Maggie's house to drop off mail collected during the Florida trip. Their visit was brief, part of their usual daily routine. Sydney mentioned her plans for the afternoon, including baking cookies or brownies and going for a run. Her mother, concerned about the heat and the fact that Sydney had already worked out, tried to gently discourage her from running. Sydney smiled and reassured her that the run wasn't about exercise, but more of a break to clear her mind. Before parting, they exchanged loving words and said they would talk soon. Neither of them knew that those would be the last words they said to each other. Back home, cameras again captured Sydney checking her Apple Watch to track her running stats. Around 2:30 p.m., she headed out for her usual route on Highway 18 between Newport and Grubbs. It was a familiar path she often ran, passing through quiet fields and farmlands with minimal traffic. The road, with its smooth surface and lack of distractions, was ideal for running. At the same time, Quake was driving down the road in his pickup truck and saw Sydney running. She didn't look distressed or make any gestures for help. He drove past her, but then turned around, returned to her road, and began following her. He slowed down, while she continued running, completely oblivious to the danger. Without warning, Quake acted. He abruptly steered his truck towards Sydney and struck her. Later, he would admit he used his vehicle as a weapon. The impact was severe, leaving Sydney gravely injured and unable to move. After the collision, Quake stepped out of his truck, lifted Sydney's body into the truck bed, and drove away. He left the main highway and followed a dirt road leading to farmland owned by his family. Stopping in a remote, hidden area, he carried out a violent act while Sydney was in a semi-conscious state. He abandoned her there, without aid, without clothing. Following this, he decided to end her life. Then, Quake dug a shallow grave nearby on his family's property, placed Sydney's body inside, covered it with dirt, and left the scene. Returning home, he cleaned himself up, showering and changing clothes, and then hid his stained clothing in his mother's laundry hamper. He remained silent about what he had done. Giving no indication of guilt, he continued his day as if nothing had happened. He ate dinner with his family, answered phone calls, and behaved as if everything was normal. For hours, he displayed no signs of distress. No one around him suspected that he had committed such a violent crime and concealed it. That same evening, the 19th of August, Sydney didn't return home. Her partner, Alex, wasn't immediately alarmed. Assuming at first she was simply delayed, the two typically stayed in contact throughout the day, but when 30 minutes passed without a response, then an hour, Alex started to worry. Her phone rang, but there was no answer, just voicemail. Sydney also wasn't responding on messaging apps, which was entirely unlike her. She was always quick to answer, even during brief pauses in daily activities like exercising. The possibility that her phone battery had died crossed Alex's mind, but as time went on, his worry deepened. He repeatedly called, sent messages, and tried to find any signs of activity, but there was nothing. Growing increasingly concerned, Alex contacted Sydney's mother, Maggie. Maggie said she had seen Sydney earlier that day and that everything had seemed fine. Sydney had mentioned going for a run, and Maggie assumed she had returned home afterwards. But when she too couldn't get in touch with Sydney, alarm set in. Together, Alex and Maggie contacted friends and family, trying to gather information, but no one had heard from her. That evening, Alex officially reported Sydney missing. He knew something was wrong. She wasn't the type to simply disappear. She always informed someone of her plans and stayed connected with those close to her. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office took the report seriously. The sheriff, who knew Sydney and her family personally, immediately dismissed the idea. that she had left of her own accord. By the morning of the 20th of August, a search effort was underway. Authorities activated all possible resources, enlisting local law enforcement, state investigators, and federal agents. The search quickly grew into one of the largest in the county's history. Volunteers from the community, men, women, teenagers, and retirees joined alongside police. Some took time off work, while others arranged for neighbors to watch their children. More than 300 people gathered for the search, not wasting any time. Every minute was critical. They began with Sydney's usual jogging route, scrutinizing roadsides, ditches, and tree lines. While investigators simultaneously gathered digital data, Sydney had been wearing an Apple Watch and carried her iPhone. Details that became vital to the case. Investigators requested and quickly received geolocation data from Sydney's Apple and cell phone providers. The coordinates pointed toward a specific area between Newport and Grubbs along the highway near her reported sighting. A delivery driver later confirmed seeing Sydney running along the highway on the 19th of August. He noted that she was alone, appeared fine, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. His account matched the time and location from her device data, which helped narrow down the search area. As a result, search teams focused their efforts there. On the morning of the 20th of August, a group of volunteers found Sydney's iPhone lying in the grass near her home. The phone was undamaged, but appeared to have been deliberately thrown there rather than dropped accidentally. A forensic examination later confirmed that the phone had been moved, marking a major turning point in the case. Sydney's disappearance was no longer seen as routine. Instead, it became a potential criminal investigation. Investigators began questioning anyone who had been in the area around the time Sydney disappeared. Among those interviewed was Quake Llewellyn, who voluntarily came to the station. He claimed to have seen Sydney that day and expressed his willingness to help. According to him, she was running alone and appeared fine. He insisted he hadn't noticed anything unusual and cooperated fully, even allowing investigators to inspect his truck. During the inspection of the truck bed, officers discovered traces of blood, an inconsistency in Quake's account. Up to that point, he had made no mention of any physical contact with Sydney. This discovery has changed the direction of the investigation, as the car is now regarded as a critical piece of evidence in the case. Investigators then reviewed Quake's digital footprint, including location data from his phone on the day Sydney vanished. His phone movements closely matched hers, aligning with her path nearly minute by minute. This overlap was no coincidence. Additional evidence was revealed through security camera footage on Quake's family farm. The footage showed his truck leaving the property and returning later with the bed covered by a tarp. Beneath the tarp was a large, distinct shape that hadn't been there earlier. This directly contradicted Quake's account and heightened investigators' suspicions. Faced with mounting evidence, Quake began to buckle under pressure. Initially, he continued denying involvement, but he eventually admitted that there had been an accident. He claimed he unintentionally hit Sydney due to poor visibility and dusty road conditions. Panicked, he placed her body in the bed of his truck and drove away instead of calling for help. He described his actions as driven by fear and confusion. However, as investigators pressed for more details, his story evolved. He admitted to removing Sydney's clothing, hiding her body, and burying her to conceal the incident. He also confessed to discarding the clothing he had worn during the crime in a laundry hamper at his mother's house. These actions were no longer consistent with panic. They were deliberate attempts to conceal evidence. A search of Quake's mother's house uncovered critical evidence: a black shirt and shorts belonging to him. Forensic tests later revealed that Sydney's hair and DNA were on these items, directly connecting him to the crime. The case against Quake grew stronger, with witness statements, blood evidence, GPS data, and surveillance footage forming a damning chain of incriminating evidence. Armed with this evidence, investigators brought Quake in for further questioning. They confronted him with the incidents, location data from his phone, surveillance footage from his family farm, the blood found in his truck, and the clothing he had tried to hide. His initial account of a tragic accident became less convincing. Under pressure, he contradicted himself, and when directly asked what he did after hitting Sydney, he admitted to taking her body to a secluded field owned by his family. There, he committed further acts of assault. When asked if Sydney had still been alive at the time, he avoided giving a clear answer. Quake described the incident as happening quickly and feeling like a blur. He admitted that he had buried Sydney in a shallow grave, convinced that no one would search there. He revealed that he had chosen the location beforehand and was familiar with the area. Afterward, he returned home, discarded his clothes into a laundry basket, showered, and ate dinner as though it were just another day. He remained unsettlingly calm. On August 21, 2020, 3 days after Sydney's disappearance, the search came to a tragic conclusion. Law enforcement and investigators followed Quake's directions to a secluded field owned by his family, far from main roads and difficult to access without knowing the land well. At the exact spot Quake indicated, officers found freshly disturbed soil. When they dug beneath the surface, they discovered her body. Forensic experts started processing the scene. The grave was shallow, with no effort to hide it permanently. Her body was found in a twisted position, partially covered by clothing that Quake either forgot or chose not to remove. Everything he had confessed matched the evidence. Before investigators, forensic analysis determined that Sydney had sustained multiple injuries. Some showed signs of a struggle, but her primary cause of death was blunt force trauma inflicted with significant force from hands and feet. Her death hadn't been immediate. Before she died, Sydney endured violent acts. Medical examiners confirmed the crime unfolded in stages. First, she was injured after being hit by a vehicle. Then, she was placed into a truck, transported, and assaulted. Finally, she was fatally beaten. Immediately after recovering her body, police arrested Quake Llewellyn. Quake was charged with first-degree murder, assault, kidnapping, and desecration of a body. The charges were supported by overwhelming evidence, including his confession, forensic findings, and witness testimony. For Sydney's family, the worst fears were realized. The hope they clung to during the early days of her disappearance was gone. Sydney's body was found buried not far from where she had grown up. The news of her death devastated her family and the entire community of grubs, volunteers, healthcare workers, and teachers who had searched tirelessly for her were deeply affected. The most painful revelation was that the person responsible had been among them all along, pretending to help while knowing the truth. After his arrest, Quake showed no remorse. He neither spoke out, apologized, nor offered any explanation for his actions. His demeanor was calm and detached. The officers who transported him noticed no signs of confusion or anxiety. He did not attempt to justify his actions or withdraw his confession. Quake confirmed all details of the crime without showing any emotion. Investigators completed their work, building a thorough timeline from the moment Sydney left for her run to the final ping from her Apple Watch and the discovery of her body. Every step of the sequence was verified. Even without Quake's confession, the evidence was strong enough to secure a solid case. Once the investigation was finished, Quake's case was transferred to the Jackson County District Court. His defense team knew a jury would likely find him guilty, which could result in the death penalty. In response, the defense filed a motion for a psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation took several months, and by February 2021, it was determined that Quake was competent to stand trial. He understood his actions and their consequences. The examining psychiatrist concluded that he did not suffer from any severe mental disorders. His emotional detachment was noted, but not classified as a psychological condition. He showed no remorse or sympathy for Sydney's family. The prosecution offered him a plea deal. If Quake admitted guilt, the death penalty would be taken off the table. This offer was discussed extensively with Sydney's family, who did not want a prolonged trial, repeated testimonies, or the public scrutiny of every detail of the crime. Although the decision was heart-wrenching, they agreed to accept a life sentence without the possibility of parole. On October 1, 2021, Quake Llewellyn pled guilty to the crime and assault. As part of the plea agreement, 2 additional charges were dropped. Sydney's parents and close family members were present in the courtroom. In the part of her speech about the impact of the incident, Sydney's mother directly addressed Quake and asked him to look her straight in the eyes. She told him he had no right to take her daughter from her. Her voice trembled, but her message was unwavering. Sydney's father also spoke. He called Quake a coward and stressed that Quake's actions were deliberate. The family did not focus on revenge, but on justice. Although they spoke without anger, their words conveyed the depth of their loss. Sydney's story is a sobering reminder that danger can sometimes hide behind the face of someone who seems completely ordinary. This is the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who first met Nicholas Goujon when she was just 20 years old. In 2012, while her mother, Claudine Blanchard, was asleep, Gypsy Rose would secretly use the family computer to connect with the outside world, a world her mother had kept her isolated from for most of her life. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Gypsy discovered a Christian singles website. She created a profile, hoping to find companionship and perhaps escape her suffocating existence. Nicolas Goujon, a 23-year-old man from Big Bend, Wisconsin, was also searching for connection when he came across Gypsy's profile. What started as innocent conversations about their shared faith quickly blossomed into something deeper. Nicholas couldn't help but be drawn to Gypsy's sweet demeanor and seemingly childlike voice, though he had no idea of the dark reality behind her innocent online persona. As time passed, Gypsy and Nicholas continued to text and talk online daily. Their conversations became the highlight of Gypsy's otherwise controlled and restricted life. What made Nicholas particularly appealing to Gypsy was his acceptance of her supposed medical conditions. Gypsy had grown up believing she was severely ill with leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, and numerous other ailments that her mother claimed required constant medical attention and care. Gypsy loved that she found solace in their shared conversations about faith and the future they might have together. On the surface, Gypsy and Dee Dee seemed like a loving mother and daughter dealing with severe health issues. But this was a false image. He had a mental illness called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, now known as factitious disorder, imposed on another. This condition led her to falsely claim, exaggerate, or even cause illnesses in Gypsy. Starting when Gypsy was only 3 months old, Dee Dee tricked doctors into believing her daughter was seriously sick, resulting in many needless medical tests, operations, and therapies for Gypsy. Gypsy's father, Rodney Blanchard, had separated from Dee Dee shortly before Gypsy's birth on July 27, 1991. Rodney realized that he had gotten married for the wrong reasons and couldn't continue the relationship. When he refused to return to Dee Dee, she took their newborn daughter and moved back to Louisiana to live with her family. Rodney continued to pay child support of $1,200 monthly and occasionally spoke with Gypsy on the phone. Though Dee Dee strictly controlled these conversations, during one call on Gypsy's 18th birthday, Rodney recalls Dee Dee telling him not to mention her daughter's real age, since Dee Dee thought Gypsy was 14. As Gypsy grew older, Dee Dee's control over her daughter became increasingly suffocating. She shaved Gypsy's head regularly to maintain the appearance of chemotherapy treatments, forced her to use a wheelchair despite her ability to walk, and inserted a feeding tube that was medically unnecessary. Gypsy underwent numerous painful and invasive procedures, including eye surgeries and the removal of her salivary glands. He would use topical anesthetics to cause drooling, convincing doctors that the salivary gland removal was necessary. The elaborate deception continued for years, with Dee Dee becoming increasingly skilled at doctor shopping, changing medical providers whenever anyone began to question Gypsy's mysterious ailments. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Dee Dee and Gypsy moved to Missouri. First to Aurora, Missouri, and later to Springfield, Missouri, where their deception reached new heights. The community embraced them wholeheartedly, with local organizations providing extensive support. Habitat for Humanity built them a specially designed pink house with wheelchair ramps and accessibility features. The Make-A-Wish Foundation arranged trips to Disney World and backstage passes to Miranda Lambert concerts, where Gypsy was frequently photographed with the country music star. As Gypsy entered her teenage years, she began to question her mother's explanations about her health. She couldn't help but notice that she felt perfectly capable of walking and functioning normally when her mother wasn't watching. Her curiosity about the outside world grew, and she began to suspect that something wasn't right about her situation. During secret late-night computer sessions, Gypsy began exploring dating websites and social media, desperate for connection with people her own age. It was during this time that Gypsy created multiple Facebook accounts under different names, where she reportedly liked pictures of adult content, demonstrating her growing awareness of her gender and desire for independence. When Gypsy first met Nicholas in person in March 2015, it was a revelation for both of them. Nicholas traveled from Wisconsin to Missouri to see her, with whom he had been chatting online for nearly 3 years. For Gypsy, this meeting represented everything she had been denied: companionship, romance, and the possibility of a normal relationship. For Nicholas, who struggled with autism spectrum disorder and had a history of mental health issues, Gypsy represented acceptance and love. Their relationship quickly became physical, and Gypsy experienced intimacy for the first time in her life. She couldn't help but feel that Nicholas was her ticket to freedom from her mother's oppressive control. However, their secret meetings had to be carefully orchestrated, as Dee maintained strict surveillance over her daughter's activities. When Dee discovered that Gypsy was spending time communicating with a young man online, she became increasingly jealous and possessive. As their online relationship deepened, Gypsy and Nicholas began to discuss their fantasies about being together permanently. They chose names for potential children and talked about eloping, dreams that seemed impossible given Gypsy's supposed medical conditions and her mother's constant supervision. Nicholas, blindly in love with Gypsy, began to develop alternate personalities that he referenced in their conversations, including what he called his evil side that enjoyed killing. Gypsy also adopted a darker persona she called Ruby during their more intense exchanges. The relationship took a disturbing turn when Gypsy's desperation to escape her mother's control began to manifest in increasingly violent fantasies. During one particularly upsetting incident at a movie theater, when Dee became angry that Gypsy was acting too old for her supposed age and physical condition, Gypsy felt her anger and helplessness reach a breaking point. She couldn't just jump out of the wheelchair because she was afraid and didn't know what her mother would do. She had no one to trust. It was after this incident that Gypsy's thoughts turned to the darkest possible solution. She couldn't help but wonder if the only way to escape her mother's control was through death, either her own or her mother's. When she posed the question to Nicholas during one of their late-night conversations, asking, "Would you kill my mother for me?" she was testing the depths of his devotion. Nicholas, so in love with Gypsy and so obsessed with her that he would do anything for her, agreed quite easily. They began to plan what they called Plan B, the murder of Dee Blanchard. Their text messages during this period became increasingly focused on the logistics of the crime, discussing the need for duct tape, knives, and gloves. Nicholas spoke of his evil side, while Gypsy embraced her darker persona, Ruby. As they planned the unthinkable, as the early months of 2015 passed, Gypsy's desperation to escape her mother's control grew exponentially. Dee had become increasingly suspicious of her daughter's online activities and had tightened her surveillance even further. She physically chained Gypsy to the bed at times and put bells on the doors to alert her if Gypsy tried to move around the house, unsupervised. Dee told anyone who would listen that Gypsy was probably going through a phase and asked them to inform her if they noticed Gypsy doing anything behind her back. The isolation was becoming unbearable for Gypsy, who was now in her early 22nd, but still being treated like a young child with severe disabilities. She feels that her entire life was a lie, and her mother's control was becoming more physically abusive as Gypsy showed signs of rebellion. During this time, Gypsy's relationship with Nicholas provided the only escape from her suffocating reality, and their conversations became increasingly focused on finding a permanent solution to her situation. Nicholas, who had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and had an IQ on the lower side of average, was completely devoted to Gypsy and believed that helping her escape her mother's abuse was an act of love and protection. His own troubled past, including a previous arrest for indecent exposure, made him feel like an outsider who had finally found acceptance and purpose through his relationship with Gypsy. As their plans became more concrete, Gypsy sent Nicholas money in the mail so he could purchase a bus ticket to travel from Wisconsin to Missouri. They had decided that the murder would take place in June 2015, when Nicholas could visit and carry out their plan. Gypsy's unease grew as she contemplated the reality of what they were planning. But she remained steadfast in her belief that this was the only way she could ever be free from her mother's oppressive control. In the days leading up to the 9th of June, 2015, the tension in the Blanchard household was palpable. She had no idea that her daughter was planning her death. She continued to maintain strict control over every aspect of Gypsy's life. The two had recently returned from yet another medical appointment where Gypsy had to undergo the replacement of her feeding tube, another unnecessary medical procedure that served to maintain the illusion of her severe illness. On the evening of June 10, 2015, Nicholas arrived in Springfield and made his way to the Blanchard house. Gypsy had left the front door unlocked for him, and she provided him with gloves, duct tape, and a large, serrated knife. Her heart was pounding as she retreated to the bathroom, covering her ears so she wouldn't hear her mother's screams. She remained in the bathroom during the entire attack, knowing that Nicholas was carrying out the violent act that would finally free her from her mother's control. Just a few minutes ago, Dee lay sleeping peacefully, unaware that her life was about to end. Nicholas stabbed her 17 times in the back while she slept, ensuring that she would never wake up. The attack was brutal and merciless, carried out by a young man who believed he was saving the woman he loved from a lifetime of abuse and imprisonment. Following the murder, Gypsy and Nicholas stole more than $4,400 in cash that Dee had been keeping in the house, mostly from Rodney's monthly child support payments. They carefully mailed the murder weapon back to Nicholas's home in Wisconsin to avoid being caught with evidence of the crime. They then fled to a motel outside Springfield, where they stayed for several days before purchasing bus tickets to Wisconsin. Several witnesses who saw they on their way to the bus station noted that Gypsy wore a blonde wig and walked unassisted, a shocking sight for anyone who had known her as a wheelchair-bound invalid. For the first time in her life, Gypsy was walking freely in public. Everyone who knew the Blanchard family knew something was terribly wrong when disturbing posts began appearing on Dee's Facebook page. On June 14, 2015, Friends and neighbors were shocked to see a post on the DD Facebook page. The language was completely out of character for the devoted mother they thought they knew, and multiple people immediately tried calling the house to check on the family. When phone calls went unanswered for several hours, concerned friends and neighbors gathered at the Blanchard home. They noticed that Dee Dee's specially modified car was still in the driveway, making it unlikely that the pair had left on one of their frequent medical trips. The protective film on the windows made it difficult to see inside the house, and no one answered when they knocked on the door. Filled with concern for both Dee Dee and Gypsy's safety, the gathered friends called 911 to request a welfare check. When police arrived at the scene, they had to wait for a search warrant to be issued before they could legally enter the home. However, they allowed a neighbor to climb through a window to gain access. The discovery inside the Blanchard home was horrifying beyond imagination. His body was found in her bedroom, lying face down in a pool of blood. The scene was gruesome, with evidence of a violent attack scattered throughout the room. What made the discovery even more shocking was the absence of Gypsy. Her wheelchair was left behind. The community had always known Gypsy as a severely disabled young woman who could not walk or care for herself. Therefore, her disappearance raised immediate concerns that she had been kidnapped by whoever had murdered her mother. Crime scene investigators arrived quickly to begin their meticulous examination. They carefully documented every piece of evidence, taking photographs and collecting samples that might provide insight into the horrible, final moments of Dee Dee's life. The investigation revealed the brutal nature of the attack, with blood spatter patterns indicating that the victim had been stabbed multiple times while she slept. As investigators continued their work, they began to trace the disturbing Facebook posts that had first alerted the community to the tragedy. Using advanced technology, they were able to track the IP address from which the posts had been made, leading them to an address in Big Bend, Wisconsin. This breakthrough would prove crucial in solving the case and uncovering the truth about what had really happened to the Blanchard family. Law enforcement officers in Missouri immediately contacted their counterparts in Wisconsin. On June 15, 2015, police agencies in Waukesha County prepared to raid the Nicholas Godejohn's home. The investigation was moving quickly, but no one yet understood the complex web of deception and abuse that had led to this shocking crime. Meanwhile, a vigil was held in Springfield for both Dee Dee and Gypsy, as community members still believed that Gypsy was a victim who had been kidnapped. The outpouring of support was tremendous, with hundreds of people gathering to pray for the safe return of the young woman they had all come to know and love as a brave fighter battling multiple serious illnesses. When Wisconsin law enforcement officers arrived at the Godejohn home in Big Bend, they were surprised to find both Nicholas and Gypsy there, alive and unharmed. Even more shocking was the fact that Gypsy was walking normally and appeared to be in perfect health, a stark contrast to the wheelchair-bound, oxygen-dependent young woman the community had known for years. Both Nicholas and Gypsy surrendered peacefully to authorities. They were taken into custody, charged with first-degree murder and felony armed criminal action. The news that Gypsy was safe was initially greeted with relief in Springfield, but that relief quickly turned to confusion and horror as the truth about the Blanchard family began to emerge. During their initial questioning, both Nicholas and Gypsy confessed to their roles in Dee Dee's murder. Nicholas admitted that he had stabbed Dee Dee to death and said he had only done it because Gypsy had asked him to. Gypsy, meanwhile, acknowledged that she had been in the house during the murder, had provided Nicholas with the weapon, and had done nothing to stop the attack. Medical examinations revealed that Gypsy was perfectly healthy and had never suffered from any of the serious illnesses her mother had claimed plagued her throughout her life. The realization that the entire community had been deceived for years sent shockwaves through Springfield and beyond. In announcing the arrests, Greene County Sheriff warned the public that things are not always as they appear. This understated comment would prove to be one of the most significant understatements in criminal justice history, as the full scope of Dee Dee's deception and Gypsy's victimization began to come to light. Medical records and expert testimony revealed that Dee Dee had been systematically abusing her daughter through unnecessary medical treatments and procedures for more than 2 decades. Gypsy had undergone countless surgeries, including eye procedures, the removal of her salivary glands, and the insertion of feeding tubes, all based on her mother's false claims about her health conditions. The investigation revealed that Dee Dee had used various methods to maintain the illusion of her daughter's illness. She regularly shaved Gypsy's head to simulate the effects of chemotherapy treatments and forced her daughter to use a wheelchair despite her ability to walk normally. Expert witnesses explained that Dee Dee suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a rare mental health disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention, sympathy, and often financial benefits. The diagnosis helped explain how Dee Dee had been able to deceive doctors, community members, and even her own family for so many years. As the case moved through the legal system, prosecutors faced the complex challenge of determining appropriate charges for both defendants. While Nicholas had clearly committed the physical act of murder, Gypsy's role as both victim and accomplice created unprecedented legal and ethical questions about justice and accountability. The prosecutor announced that he would not seek the death penalty for either defendant, calling the case extraordinary and unusual. The decision reflected the unique circumstances surrounding the crime and the recognition that Gypsy had been a victim of severe abuse throughout her entire life. Gypsy's defense attorney, Michael Stanfield, worked tirelessly to secure a favorable plea agreement for his client. After obtaining Gypsy's medical records and documenting the extensive abuse she had suffered, Stanfield was able to negotiate a plea deal that took into account her status as a long-term victim of child abuse and medical maltreatment. On the 5th of July, 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard appeared in court to enter her plea. When asked how she pleaded to the charge of second-degree murder, she responded clearly, "Guilty." The plea agreement resulted in a sentence of 10 years in prison, the minimum sentence possible for second-degree murder under Missouri law. Unlike Gypsy, who accepted a plea agreement, Nicholas chose to go to trial, hoping for a sentence more aligned with the 10 years that Gypsy had received. His defense attorneys argued that he had diminished capacity due to his autism spectrum disorder and that he had been manipulated by Gypsy into committing the murder. During the trial, which took place in November 2018, prosecutors presented evidence of Gypsy and Nicholas's text message exchanges, which showed detailed planning of the murder over several months. The messages revealed Nicholas's references to his evil side and his willingness to kill for Gypsy, whom he claimed to love deeply. Gypsy took the stand during Nicholas's trial and testified about her role in planning the murder. She admitted to the court that she had talked him into it, acknowledging her part in convincing Nicholas to kill her mother. Her testimony was crucial in establishing the premeditated nature of the crime and Nicholas's understanding of what he was being asked to do. Nicholas's attorneys argued that their client was so in love with Gypsy and so obsessed with her that he would do anything she asked, even commit murder. They contended that his autism made him more susceptible to manipulation and that he lacked the mental capabilities required for true premeditation. After deliberating the evidence and testimony, the jury found Nicholas John guilty of first-degree murder. The conviction carried the possibility of life in prison without parole, which is exactly what the judge imposed. In addition to the life sentence, Nicholas received an additional 25 years for armed criminal action. During his sentencing hearing in February 2019, Nicholas addressed the court and reiterated that he had murdered Dee Dee Blanchard because he wanted to help free Gypsy from her abusive situation. His words reflected the complicated emotions and motivations that had driven him to commit such a violent act in the name of love and protection. The contrast between Gypsy's 10-year sentence and Nicholas's life sentence highlighted the court's recognition of the different roles each defendant had played in the crime. While both were held accountable for their actions, the legal system acknowledged that Gypsy's lifelong victimization and abuse were significant mitigating factors that warranted a more lenient sentence. Gypsy began serving her sentence at the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Missouri, where she would spend the next 8 years. For the first time since early childhood, she was living independently, making her own decisions about her daily activities, medical care, and personal relationships. During her incarceration, Gypsy focused on education and personal growth. She worked to understand the complex psychological dynamics that had defined her relationship with her mother and to develop the life skills she had never been allowed to learn. The restrictive prison environment, ironically, offered her more freedom and autonomy than she had ever experienced under her mother's care. In July 2022, Gypsy married Ryan Anderson, a teacher from Louisiana, in a prison ceremony without any guests present. The marriage represented a new chapter and her continued efforts to build healthy relationships. On December 28, 2023, after serving 8 years of her 10-year sentence, Gypsy was released from prison on parole. She walked out of the Chillicothe Correctional Center at 3:30 a.m., finally experiencing true freedom for the first time in her 32 years. Her release generated enormous media attention and public interest, with millions following her story through documentaries, television series, and social media. Gypsy embraced her newfound fame and freedom, quickly amassing nearly 10 million followers across various social media platforms where she documented her life after prison. In interviews following her release, Gypsy expressed deep regret about her mother's death while also acknowledging the abuse she had suffered. She didn't deserve that, Gypsy said of her mother. She was a sick woman, and unfortunately, I wasn't educated enough to see that she deserved to be where I am now, sitting in prison, paying for her criminal behavior. In 2024, Gypsy and Ryan split up as Gypsy continues to grapple with the complexities of adult relationships, a challenge made even greater by her unique and traumatic upbringing. Today, Gypsy is in a relationship with Ken Urker, whom she originally met through a pen pal program while in prison. On December 28, 2024, exactly 1 year after her release from prison, Gypsy gave birth to a daughter. The birth of her child represents hope for a new generation and Gypsy's opportunity to break the cycle of abuse that defined her own childhood. Her unease about discussing her past has grown as she contemplates how she will one day explain to her daughter the circumstances that led to her grandmother's death and her own imprisonment. However, Gypsy remains determined to provide her child with the healthy, honest upbringing that she herself was denied. With a heavy heart, we remember as a woman who suffered from severe mental illness that drove her to harm the child she was supposed to protect. At the same time, we acknowledge Gypsy as both a victim and a survivor who made terrible choices in her desperate attempt to escape an impossible situation. The story continues to unfold as Gypsy navigates her new life as a free woman, mother, and public figure. Her journey from victim to survivor to convicted criminal and finally to free citizen represents one of the most complex and compelling true crime stories of our time. Francesca Brandoli and Christian Cavalletti met in Italy in 1998 when they were both 25 years old. Francesca lived in Reggio Emilia, while Christian lived nearby. They first connected over the phone, which was a common practice at the time since chat rooms and dating sites had not yet become popular. People often filled out personal questionnaires, and potential partners were matched based on their responses. Francesca and Christian felt an instant connection. Their relationship quickly evolved from regular phone calls to in-person meetings, and soon they couldn't imagine being apart. Francesca moved to Vilova to be closer to Christian. At the time, Christian was focused on advancing his career, running a small knitwear shop while maintaining close ties with his family. He was active, energetic, and passionate about motorbikes. A hobby that Francesca also enjoyed, she eagerly became a part of his life, and they often went on motorcycle rides, spending time with friends and family. They married on the 19th of September, the same year they met. After their wedding, Francesca began working at Christian's shop, and their lives became closely intertwined. Francesca and Christian spent nearly all their time together, ignoring advice from others to give each other occasional space. Both believed their close bond was unshakable. Their family and friends saw them as a perfect match, deeply connected on every level. However, life brought unexpected challenges for Francesca and Christian. They both wanted a family, but had different timelines. Francesca was eager to have a child, while Christian preferred to delay parenthood to focus on building a stable foundation for their future. He worried about providing for their family if children came too soon. In 2001, their first child, David, was born, bringing joy but also significant changes to their routine. Francesca devoted herself to raising their son, while Christian immersed himself in work. Even though they have to make many adjustments, they still strive to balance their lives. 2 years later, in 2003, they welcomed their second son, Lorenzo. However, after Lorenzo's birth, their relationship began to shift. Francesca confided in friends and family that she felt increasingly distant from Christian. Similarly, Christian shared with his friends that he felt uncomfortable at home and sensed a growing disconnect. He believed Francesca was struggling with severe postpartum depression, which led to frequent conflicts. These tensions strained their once harmonious relationship, causing them to drift apart. Francesca's emotional state worsened. She felt abandoned and unloved, as though Christian no longer cared for her. Desperate to fill the emotional void, she considered seeking help from a family counselor, but nothing seemed to improve their situation. Resentment toward her husband grew, and Francesca decided to explore other ways to feel valued. She registered on a dating site and, by chance, met a man named Davide Ravarelli. He was a 34 years old, communications and advertising professional, university lecturer, and a charismatic, athletic man. Francesca was immediately drawn to him. Initially, Francesca saw Davide as a distraction from her unhappiness, a way to escape her routine and feel appreciated again. However, as their connection deepened, she began to fear that she couldn't return to her life with Christian. Over time, she came to accept that she wanted to leave her marriage and start anew with Davide. Their emotional affair reignited feelings in Francesca that she thought had long faded. With Davide, she felt desired and alive again. Their online connection transformed into a passionate relationship. The situation was complicated, though. Not only was Francesca still married with children, but Davide also had a wife and kids of his own. David was going through a similar marital crisis, feeling trapped in his relationship with no apparent way out. His affair with Francesca became the catalyst for making drastic changes in his life. After a few months of their relationship, they decided to leave their families to be together officially. For Francesca, this meant making the heartbreaking decision to leave not only her husband, but also her 2 sons. Early in her new relationship, she began fighting for full custody of her children. However, the court ruled that her sons would remain with their father, Christian. The court's decision devastated Francesca, who had hoped to remain an integral part of her children's lives. Feeling hurt and angered by Francesca's betrayal, Christian refused to allow her any contact with their sons, further deepening her emotional turmoil. During this time, she discovered she was pregnant with David's child. Although this complicated matters, Davide supported her. Still, Francesca was unable to repair her relationship with her sons or gain access to them. Christian, feeling abandoned and betrayed, strictly adhered to the court's ruling and refused any compromises regarding the custody arrangement. He prevented Francesca from spending more time with the children, citing her betrayal as justification. Despite having limited rights for scheduled visits, Francesca's attempts to negotiate always ended in failure. Frustrated and unable to communicate with Christian, she often confided in Davide, occasionally exaggerating Christian's behavior out of resentment. Over time, Davide began to see Christian as a major obstacle in Francesca's life. Francesca's resentment grew, rooted in her feelings of abandonment during her marriage. She believed that she didn't deserve the treatment she had endured, and her frustration gradually turned into an obsession. One day, following yet another unsuccessful attempt to gain more access to her children, Francesca returned home, enraged. Christian had once again denied her requests, arguing that her infidelity could harm her case in court. The tension between them continued to escalate daily. November 30, 2006, turned out to be a pivotal and tragic day. A custody hearing was approaching, and the ongoing conflict persisted. While Christian lived with his sons, Francesca remained determined to fight for greater access. That evening, Christian's neighbor noticed something unusual. Late at night, he heard strange noises and saw Christian approaching his gate to meet two figures standing outside. Despite the inappropriate timing, Christian calmly chatted with them and invited them into his home. Moments later, as Christian walked toward his house, the two individuals suddenly attacked him. Realizing the severity of the situation, the neighbor rushed outside, managing to scare off the attackers. However, by then, it was too late. Christian lay on the ground in a pool of blood at 11:25 p.m. Emergency services received a call from the distraught neighbor, reporting that Christian had been violently attacked. Though still alive when authorities arrived, Christian's condition was critical. His injuries were so severe that even immediate medical treatment could not save him. It was clear he had been brutally assaulted. Christian had suffered approximately 20 stab wounds and 9 blows, primarily to his head. His skull was shattered, and the stab wounds to his stomach and neck were catastrophic. Numerous injuries could have been fatal, including heavy blows to his head that caused massive brain hemorrhaging and stab wounds that severed critical arteries. Defensive wounds on Christian's hands indicated that he had fought desperately against his attackers and might have injured them in the struggle. Forensic investigators examined the crime scene, finding evidence near the gate, as well as a long trail of blood leading to where Christian's body was discovered near the entrance to the house. It appears that after being attacked, he tried to run home, but died near the entrance due to his severe injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Christian likely let his attackers into his home willingly. This shows that he knows and trusts them enough to let them into his house, even at night. A neighbor served as a key witness, though he hadn't seen the attackers' faces. However, he was able to provide basic descriptions that helped guide the authorities. Using this information, the police began investigating Christian's inner circle. Christian was generally known as a decent man who had no enemies or major conflicts in his life. However, the biggest event he faced was the tense divorce and subsequent custody battle. Determined not to lose custody of his sons to his ex-wife Francesca, who had moved in with her new partner Davide, Christian fought hard in court. Due to the emotionally charged dynamics of this love triangle, the Carabinieri quickly identified Francesca and Davide as primary suspects. Christian had often complained about Francesca during their marriage, frequently accusing her of infidelity. His friends and family were well aware of the bitter custody fight, which had ultimately ended in Christian's favor after Francesca left the family for another man, Davide. This outcome created a strong motive for Francesca to seek revenge. Friends and family also recall Francesca's interactions with Christian, leaving her confused and uncomfortable, seemingly adding to her animosity towards him. Despite these circumstances, Both Francesca and Davide vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. Background checks revealed that neither of them had a criminal record, and both appeared to be law-abiding citizens on the surface. However, the evidence suggested the attack had been carefully premeditated, making it difficult to assign responsibility definitively. The investigation faced significant challenges due to a lack of concrete evidence, such as a murder weapon or items directly linked to the attackers. Authorities believed the perpetrators had destroyed anything incriminating in an effort to obtain further evidence. Detectives decided to wiretap Francesca and Davide's conversations, hoping the surveillance would reveal new information or even a confession. People suspected of such crimes often end up discussing their actions over time. However, Francesca and Davide seemed aware that they were under surveillance and deliberately avoided mentioning Christian's death, considering it a taboo subject. Their excessive caution led the detectives to suspect that they were trying to avoid detection. Sometime later, Francesca and Davide rented a car, apparently convinced their own vehicles were bugged. Believing the new car was free of monitoring devices, they began speaking more openly. What they didn't realize, however, was that their mobile phones were also being tapped, allowing detectives to record everything. During these private conversations, they discussed the murder in detail, referencing key evidence and revealing where it had been hidden. Their statements revealed a complete indifference to the crime. Neither of them expressed any remorse. Instead, they were concerned about whether they would be caught and imprisoned. By this point, the police had gathered substantial evidence, and the recorded confessions solidified the case. Francesca and Davide were arrested and charged with murder. Both were jailed while awaiting trial. The first court hearing for Christian's murder took place on March 26, 2008. At the time, Francesca was in prison and pregnant. A few months later, she gave birth to a child who was immediately placed with a foster family. As the trial neared, Francesca and Davide, who initially denied any involvement in the crime, began blaming and accusing each other in hopes of getting a lighter sentence. Davide claimed that Francesca had pressured him into participating in the murder, citing psychological manipulation, jealousy, and subtle threats as the reasons behind his involvement. He portrayed himself as a reluctant participant in the brutal killing. Davide described Francesca as a manipulative person who relentlessly pressured him into killing her ex-husband, Christian. For a long time, Davide resisted, but over time, Francesca's lies and manipulations succeeded in persuading him. Francesca's trial was postponed multiple times. A key witness in the case was a neighbor who heard Christian's desperate cries for help while he was being beaten outside. Although the neighbor did not see the attackers' faces clearly, he insisted that apart from Francesca and Davide, no one else could have been involved. He was with Christian in his final moments until Christian was seriously injured and died from blood loss. He cooperated fully with the Carabinieri and police throughout the investigation, providing critical testimony to help hold the perpetrators accountable. While no murder weapon or clothing was recovered, having been disposed of by the criminals, recorded confessions were sufficient for a conviction. The investigation revealed that David used a knife while Francesca struck Christian with a hammer. Both tools were purchased shortly before the attack, indicating premeditation. After the murder, they threw the weapons into a river outside the city and burned their clothing. Based on their testimony, Francesca went to meet Christian with her children despite the restraining order he had against her. She claimed Christian allowed her inside, where she put the children to bed and spent time with them. Francesca alleged that Christian then began harassing her and kissed her. Meanwhile, Davide was waiting outside in the car. When she screamed, Davide rushed into the house. A fight broke out between Davide and Christian, ultimately leading to Christian's death. However, the prosecution strongly believed that the murder was premeditated Supported by extensive evidence and the prior planning of David and Francesca, the investigation revealed that they had purchased gloves, masks, and the murder weapon in advance, further supporting their intent. On October 30, 2008, after deliberating for over 9 hours, the jury convicted both Francesca Brandoli and Davide Ravarellas of murder. They were sentenced to life imprisonment. As a result of their crime, Francesca's children were left orphaned. Fortunately, Christian's parents gained custody and took care of the boys. Following the verdict, Francesca and Davide were sent to prison. Francesca, however, refused to accept the court's decision, maintaining that the murder had been Davide's idea. Driven by his jealousy, she claimed to have been coerced into participating and appealed the verdict. In letters written after the trial, Francesca accused David of planning the crime and attacking Christian, but these claims were deemed unreliable. Wiretap recordings captured Francesca casually discussing the murder without any sign of remorse. Confirming her active role in the crime, Francesca's claims were dismissed as yet another manipulative tactic. The crime and subsequent conviction irreparably damaged her and David's relationship, and they ended their partnership before their trials began. During her imprisonment, Francesca's health deteriorated, and she often complained about both her physical and emotional well-being. Her troubles escalated in 2009 when she attempted to harm herself, prompting authorities to keep a closer eye on her. News of Francesca's case has sparked debate about living conditions in Italian prisons. Activists and organizations criticized the correctional system for failing to rehabilitate inmates or prepare them for life after release. For prisoners serving life sentences, they argued the lack of hope often made death seem more bearable than enduring incarceration. Prisoners lack any motivation or reason to keep going. What do they have to live for? The prison authorities have been widely criticized for disregarding these serious issues. Yet, as usual, the response has been limited to a few generic statements made in televised appearances. On July 14, 2010, the Supreme Court upheld the decision and life sentence against Francesca, as real evidence and witness testimony disproved her lies. Both she and Davide remained in prison for life. This ruling was expected to close the case, which had become one of Italy's most sensational murder trials in recent years. However, journalists continued to follow Francesca's story closely as her life behind bars took unexpected turns. Despite breaking up with her lover, Davide, Francesca still craved love and sought happiness. While serving her sentence, she met another inmate, Luca Zambelli, who had been arrested on May 15, 2006, for the murder of his wife. Luca, an electrician at the time, had been living with his wife, Stefania Casolari, and their 2 children in a suburban apartment in Italy. Their marriage was falling apart, and by 2006, they were undergoing a divorce. Despite conflicts over custody and property, they were still living under the same roof. With no hope for reconciliation, Stefania had moved on and found a new partner, which deeply clashed with Luca's hopes of repairing their relationship. On May 15, 2006, while Stefania was speaking to her new lover on the phone, Luca overheard the flirtatious conversation and became enraged. Grabbing a kitchen knife, he attacked Stefania, stabbing her multiple times. Several of the wounds, especially those to her neck, proved fatal as they severed her carotid artery and trachea, leaving Stefania with no chance of survival. After killing her, Luca fled the scene, but he was arrested the following day. Although he initially claimed to remember nothing, investigators uncovered his violent and possessive behavior, which had driven Stefania to seek separation. Tragically, she had underestimated the threat he posed, which ultimately led to her murder. In 2007, Luca stood trial and received a 20-year prison sentence. He avoided a harsher penalty because his actions were deemed to result from an emotional outburst. The judge considered his rage and jealousy as mitigating factors. In addition to his sentence, Luca was ordered to pay 100,000 euros in compensation to his two children, who had lost both their parents. However, he never compensated the amount due to a lack of funds. In 2011, during an appeal, his prison term was reduced to 18 years after the court recognized that he suffered from a minor mental disorder and that his actions were driven by jealousy. It was during this time, while waiting for his appeal hearing, that Luca met Francesca. They claimed to have fallen in love instantly. On August 23, 2011, they decided to marry in prison. The wedding, which was held in the prison governor's office, was highly unusual and opposed by the couple's relatives. No family members were present. The only witnesses were prison guards, who signed the register. After a brief kiss, they were taken back to their separate cells. Following the wedding, they were allowed to meet 6 times a month instead of just once, but they were not permitted to spend the night together. As journalists later reported, their relationship seemed more a matter of convenience than genuine emotion. Francesca continued to assert Luca's innocence, stating that he regretted his mistake, which was causing Stefania's death. However, by 2016, 5 years after their marriage, Francesca and Luca decided to divorce by mutual agreement. In 2015, while in custody at San Vittore prison, Francesca was given the opportunity to work at the Milan Expo. This initiative aimed to help selected prisoners reintegrate into society. Later, she was transferred to the Balata Penitentiary, known for its innovative rehabilitation methods. However, after 2016, no significant updates or reports about Francesca emerged for several years. She continued her life as a regular inmate, serving a life sentence, until a tragic event occurred on the morning of March 31, 2025. During a routine inspection, a prison guard noticed an unusual silence coming from Francesca's cell. After knocking and receiving no response, the guard entered and discovered her lifeless body lying on her bedsheet. Attempts were made to resuscitate her, but they were unsuccessful. When medical personnel arrived, they could only confirm her death. Francesca, aged 52 at the time, had shown no recent signs of distress. In fact, just 15 days earlier, she had been assessed by medical staff who believed there was no immediate risk to her life. Her decision appeared to have been impulsive and shocked both the public and authorities. This incident brought back memories of Francesca's earlier struggles with mental health. She had tried to harm herself in a similar manner at least once. During an appeal phase in Bologna in 2009, she used a sheet but was saved by her cellmates, who noticed her attempt in time. Following that incident, she was placed under heightened monitoring as her risk of self-harm had been considered high at various points during her imprisonment. Caroline Serrano Cordero was born on December 21, 1993, in Heredia Province, Costa Rica. Since childhood, she was raised by her mother, Rosemary, because her biological father left the family. Later, Rosemary began a relationship with Miguel Ortiz, who stepped in as a father figure and treated Caroline as his own. They eventually had another daughter, Francine. Despite financial challenges, the family cultivated a warm and loving home. Rosemary became known for her hard work, selling traditional Mexican foods like tamales to support her family. She became a role model for Caroline, a symbol of strength and independence. After Rosemary and Miguel separated, she was again raising her two daughters on her own. Later, she married Roman Giron, who accepted Caroline and Francine into his life as his own. Together, Rosemary and Roman had 3 sons, Rayundo, Omar, and Simon, forming a large, blended family. As the eldest, Caroline was responsible for all the housework, taking care of her younger siblings and always devoted herself to helping her mother from a young age. While growing up, she dreamed of becoming a lawyer to stand up for others and resolve conflicts within the justice system. However, due to financial difficulties, she had to put her university plans on hold and decided to work first. At 20, Caroline began dating someone and later gave birth to her daughter, Amanda, in 2016. Although her relationship with Amanda's father ended, he remained involved in their daughter's life. Focused on providing for Amanda, she began working at Bimbo Bakery in Heredia. With a steady income, she rented a home in the La Milpa neighborhood of San Francisco, not far from her mother, but still in a different area. Despite her own expenses, Caroline continued to support her mother, Rosemary, financially, and showed gestures of love on special occasions. While Caroline worked, Amanda stayed with her grandmother, keeping the family tightly connected. Maintaining strong family relationships remained her top priority. Although she was financially independent and devoted to her daughter, Caroline longed for love and companionship. In 2018, when she was 24, she met someone new, a man named Jubilo Hidalgo, who was 21 at the time. They met while working together at Bimbo Bakery. Jubilo appeared kind, respectful, and persistent in showing his interest, giving no indication of having a hidden life. Unbeknownst to Caroline, Jubilo was already married and lived with his wife in San Pablo de Heredia. He carefully concealed this from her, avoiding any mention of his personal life and never introducing her to his family or friends. Their relationship progressed quickly, but Caroline hesitated to introduce Jubilo to her mother. Something didn't feel right, and she found herself doubting his intentions. Whenever Caroline asked about their future or requested clarity, Jubilo evaded the questions. He avoided meeting her family and kept their relationship private, offering vague explanations. Over time, Caroline began to feel that he was hiding something. Still, she chose to trust his assurances that his reluctance wasn't because of another woman. He promised that things would change and asked her to wait, convincing her to remain patient and hopeful. Despite her insecurities, Caroline tried to stay calm and hoped that time would clear things up. However, Jubilo's avoidance and actions only made her more suspicious of the relationship. Despite her doubt, Caroline didn't end the relationship. She clung to the hope that she could turn things around. All she wanted was a genuine, respectful partnership. However, over time, the harsh reality began to set in. Her hopes went unfulfilled. The relationship became one-sided, revolving entirely around Jubilo's terms. Caroline remained emotionally attached, but increasingly uncertain about her place in his life. The mounting tension shook her trust in him, leading to inevitable conflicts. For the first time, Caroline demanded answers from Jubilo, and from that moment, things began to unravel. Instead of moving toward a reconciliation, the situation spiraled toward tragedy. On August 6, 2019, she sent him a message via a chat app featuring a photo of a positive pregnancy test. However, the image was fake, downloaded from the internet. She wasn't pregnant. It was a desperate attempt to prompt Jubilo to take responsibility and openly acknowledge their relationship. She hoped the news would make him reevaluate his priorities and finally lead to an honest conversation. But his response was nothing like she had imagined. To Jubilo, the photo wasn't a call for change, it was a threat. He feared that if the pregnancy was real, their secret relationship would be exposed, ruining his reputation and his personal life. Terrified of these consequences, he decided to take extreme action, eliminate Caroline completely. Jubilo no longer wanted to talk or resolve the conflict. Over the next few days, he began looking for people to carry out his plan. He initially approached adults, but when they refused, he turned to minors, believing they were easier to manipulate. Finally, Jubilo approached a teenage girl who was known for causing trouble. He offered her a vague plan to solve the problem, emphasizing that the goal was to make things stop. The girl agreed in exchange for $250 and a pack of cigarettes. Cubillo agreed, and she began looking for more people to join. The young woman connected with a 19-year-old man named Soto Rodriguez, who was involved in street gangs and had a history of engaging in youth crime. Soto quickly agreed, bringing along another 17-year-old, whose identity has not been revealed. Altogether, at least 4 individuals, including Cubillo, were implicated in the plan. Each was promised a share of the payment. The mission is very clear: eliminate Caroline. The plan was simple: lure her to an isolated location and carry out the act swiftly and quietly. The girl involved also took on the task of purchasing weapons under Cubillo's direction. She bought a gun of unknown origin. Her actions suggested familiarity with underground networks. Moving quickly, she brought the weapon for the plan to proceed. The group agreed to execute the act at night in a secluded area. The teenagers didn't fully grasp that they were becoming accomplices to a premeditated crime. To them, it was just a job, a task to complete without considering the long-term consequences. Meanwhile, Cubillo distanced himself, subtly orchestrating events while remaining in control, yet out of sight. Unaware of the deadly plan unfolding, Caroline continued to hold on to the hope that she could salvage the relationship. Unfortunately, her attempt to save the relationship inadvertently triggered a tragedy that had already been arranged. On the 12th of August, 2019, Cubillo contacted Caroline through a messaging app, inviting her to what he described as a casual get-together with friends at a scenic overlook in the Bava area. He assured her it would be a relaxed outing and that she would be home later that night. Trusting him, Caroline agreed. On the evening, Caroline left Rosemary's house, saying she was going to meet some friends and would come back later. When she got into the car, everyone involved in the plan was already present. Cubillo, an underage girl, Soto, and another teenage boy. They drove about 4 miles to a remote location. Once there, they led Caroline to a dark, isolated spot where the horrifying plan unfolded. Using a firearm, Cubillo fatally attacked Caroline in the head. This was later confirmed in testimonies from the young accomplices, who revealed that while they restrained Caroline by holding her arms, it was Cubillo who fired the fatal shot. Initially, the group planned to burn her body, but they abandoned the idea out of fear that the flames would attract attention and fail to fully destroy evidence. Instead, since they were in a remote area, they decided to bury her in a shallow grave. They dug up the clay and expected wildlife to destroy the grave, scattering the remains and making it difficult to collect evidence. The decision to bury her was made on the spot and was not part of any detailed plan. After the crime, the group returned to the car, and Cubillo dropped everyone off at their homes. Later that night, he went to Caroline's house and removed any personal belongings she might have left behind, including her purse, ID, and phone, to make it look like she had left her home voluntarily. His aim was to create the illusion that she had vanished on her own and avoid arousing suspicion. As night fell, Caroline's mother, Rosemary, became increasingly worried. She tried calling her daughter, but there was no response. Her text messages went unread. In their family, leaving home without notice was unheard of. Caroline always informed her mother if she was running late, but now there was only silence, growing more unbearable by the minute. The following morning, Rosemary tried to convince herself that maybe Caroline had been called unexpectedly into work, but by late afternoon, she decided to visit her daughter's home. The front gate was unlocked. Inside, the lights were on, the television was playing, and her hair straightener was still plugged in. Everything indicated that Caroline hadn't planned to be away long. It seemed as though she had just stepped out for a moment, but that moment stretched into a full day. No longer able to wait, Rosemary contacted the local authorities and reported her daughter missing. Over 24 hours had now passed since their last conversation. Meanwhile, the family wasn't waiting idly. They put up flyers, spoke to neighbors, and tried retracing Carolay's steps themselves, but nobody, not even her closest neighbors, had seen her since Monday, August 12, 2019. For Rosemary, time felt frozen in a torturous loop. Each hour without news dragged endlessly. Rosemary replayed every recent detail in her mind: who had contacted Carolay, what she had said in the last few days, and who she might have been messaging. Troubling pieces of information began to surface: reports of a strange man near her house, an unfamiliar voice in a voicemail, and Carolay's recently tense demeanor. At the time, none of it made complete sense, but deep down, Rosemary feared something serious had happened. The police in Heredia promptly responded to the missing person report and began an official investigation into Carolay's disappearance. They started interviewing her friends, family, neighbors, and co-workers to gather any clues. Unfortunately, Rosemary couldn't point to anyone specific. Her daughter was supposed to meet that evening, making those initial steps more difficult. None of the family's close acquaintances had seen or heard from her. Investigators turned to surveillance footage in the area where Carolay lived. Around 10:45 p.m., cameras at a supermarket in Los Lagos captured her arriving and getting into a white Honda CR-V. She entered the car willingly, with no purse and no phone in sight. The footage showed the vehicle driving off into the night. This became the first promising lead, but identifying the driver or the license plate proved challenging due to poor camera angles. This slowed the investigation. In the following 24 hours, authorities worked relentlessly to find Carolay. They issued missing person alerts and officially opened a case, but no new information surfaced. No witnesses, no tips, and no trace of her. Her phone remained untraceable, and her bank account showed no activity. This made it increasingly doubtful that she had left voluntarily. There were no physical clues, no known disputes, and no one came forward with useful information. As a result, the police began reconsidering their initial assumptions. What first appeared to be a voluntary disappearance started to seem like a potential criminal act. The idea that Carolay had willingly left on her own became increasingly implausible. At the time, neither Carolay's family nor investigators suspected Cubillo had anything to do with her disappearance. To everyone, she was simply missing. However, despite the perpetrators' efforts to cover their tracks, their plan began to unravel. Days passed without any sign of Carolay, and police investigated numerous leads, though no breakthroughs were made. For her family, the wait was agonizing. Filled with uncertainty and emotional pain, the grief deepened on important days. In December 2019, the family held a small vigil in memory of Carolay on what would have been her 26th birthday. The Christmas season passed quietly, without any celebrations. No decorations, no tree, leaving only grief and unanswered questions. As time went on, with no progress in the investigation, the family began to feel forgotten. Determined to keep her daughter's memory alive, Rosemary, Carolay's mother, created a social media page specifically to raise awareness about her disappearance. She shared photos of Carolay, detailed the circumstances of her vanishing, and pleaded for information from anyone who might have seen or heard something. Through this page, she connected with other families facing similar tragedies, and over time, the platform evolved into a supportive community for sharing grief, stories, and updates. The unresolved loss weighed heavily on everyone, including Carolay's 3-year-old daughter, Amanda, too young to fully comprehend what had happened. Amanda often asked why her mother wasn't coming back. The adults struggled to find answers, eventually telling her that her mother had become a star in the sky. Amanda would frequently look up at the stars, finding some comfort in believing her mother was watching over her. At the beginning of 2020, nearly half a year after Carolee went missing, the case saw its first significant breakthrough. Law enforcement authorities received an anonymous tip. The caller suggested that human remains might be located on an abandoned farm near the Bava volcano in Heredia province. On February 5, police and dog units searched the remote, heavily wooded mountainous area. Forensic teams and investigators joined the search, spending hours combing through the rugged terrain. However, their efforts yielded no evidence, no signs of burial or human activity. The day ended without results. The following day, Carolee's family decided to visit the site themselves. Along a forest trail, they spotted a suspicious bag. Inside, they found bones. They immediately alerted the police, but after laboratory analysis, it was confirmed that the remains were not human, but animal. What had been a moment of hope quickly turned into profound heartbreak. Then, on the 11th of February, a new lead emerged. A local man, Juan Manuel Montero, who often walked in the area, discovered several items near a mountain trail: underwear, a blouse, shoes, and clumps of long, dark hair. He contacted the authorities, noting that the clothing matched the outfit Carolee had been wearing the night she disappeared. On the 12th of February, a new investigative team searched the area, finally achieving a breakthrough. They uncovered human remains, a skull, pelvic bones, fragments of femurs, and strands of long hair nearby. Forensic experts began collecting DNA samples to identify the remains, using genetic material from Carolee's mother, Rosemary. However, confirming the results would take 10 weeks. Despite the delay, investigators still believed the remains were likely those of Carolee. Based on the location, condition of the remains, and the presence of personal effects at the scene, information was shared with Rosemary delicately, as the identification process was still pending. As news of the discovery spread through local media, a funeral home offered to cover the family's burial costs, a rare yet significant act of kindness. However, until formal identification was completed, the family could not proceed with burying their loved one. Although evidence had surfaced, critical questions lingered: who was responsible, and what had truly happened to Carolee? In search of answers, the investigation team expanded its scope. They began reviewing all registered owners of white Honda CR-Vs in Heredia province, focusing especially on employees of Bimbo, where Carolee had worked. The search led them to one specific individual, Cubillo Hidalgo, the owner of a white Honda CR-V. The authorities monitored Cubillo and carried out a series of operations in the areas of Rincón de Ricardo and Los Molinos. During the operation, Cubillo was arrested along with 3 other youths, Soto Rodriguez, 19, and 2 others under the age of 18. During the search, the investigation team seized phones, clothing, and other related items. Particular attention was given to Cubillo's vehicle, which was sent to forensics for examination, including testing for traces of blood, biological material, and fingerprints. Authorities also searched the home of one of the teenagers, where they uncovered blood-stained clothing. All evidence was sent to a laboratory for analysis. Additionally, investigators gained access to private messages exchanged between Carolee and Cubillo. These messages revealed escalating conflict surrounding a possible pregnancy, and Carolee's demands that Cubillo publicly acknowledge their relationship. The messages provided a motive for the crime. Furthermore, Carolee had apparently been unaware that Cubillo was married, a fact that became a key element in the prosecution's case. The investigation now firmly linked Carolee's disappearance to Cubillo and those within his circle. The case moved from the investigation stage to criminal prosecution, as each suspect was exposed for his role in the case, and the shady activities were hidden behind the facade of normal life. Following the arrests, investigators quickly began interrogations. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, two of the minors admitted their involvement, confessing to their participation in both planning and executing the crime. Confessions, physical evidence, and recovered digital messages shed light on the entire incident. Carolee was targeted in a meticulously planned act by Cubillo, assisted by his young accomplices. This was no random incident or accident. It was a premeditated crime. The proceedings began with the minor girl who helped organize the crime. She was charged as an accomplice. In court, prosecutors presented her testimony, messages exchanged with Cubillo, and additional evidence proving her involvement in planning the crime. Despite the gravity of her actions, the court sentenced her to 12 years, factoring in the time she had already served in juvenile detention while awaiting her trial. Rosemary, Carolee's mother, attended the court proceedings but found the verdict hard to accept. She felt the sentence did not reflect the severity of the crime. Her family's lawyer announced plans to pursue the maximum penalty of 15 years, which is the highest sentence allowed for minors under Costa Rican law. Separately, a hearing was held for Cubillo Hidalgo and Soto Rodriguez. Both men pled guilty, leading the court to grant a fast-track trial. Each received a 24-year prison sentence for their involvement in the crime. The court also ordered Cubillo to compensate Rosemary by giving her his vehicle, motorcycle, and $1,000 in cash. Another minor involved in the case was still under investigation. With his case being reviewed by the juvenile court, no further details were shared publicly, and a final decision was expected in the coming months. This meant Carolee's story was not yet fully resolved. Rosemary decided to use the compensation money to improve their living conditions. She began renovating their home to create a private room for Amanda. As the family took on full responsibility for Amanda's care, they did everything possible to ensure she felt safe and loved. Support came not only from the legal system, but also from the community. Locals and strangers from all over the country reached out to help Rosemary. Many people ordered the traditional tamales, which she had been making. Despite the distance, people traveled to pick up their orders and offer words of encouragement. The response was overwhelming, with people bringing groceries, providing practical help, and sending heartfelt messages. This collective kindness became a source of strength for Rosemary during one of the most difficult times in her life. One day, when Amanda was playing in the yard with her grandmother, she noticed a white feather gently floating down and landing in her lap. Looking up, she said that her mum had sent it from heaven. From that day on, Amanda wore the feather in her hair until she accidentally lost it in her room. That small but meaningful moment became a cherished memory for the entire family. Colca Canyon, located in the Arequipa region of southern Peru, is a stunning yet challenging natural wonder. As the deepest canyon in the world, plunging over 13,400 feet, it presents a dramatic landscape dominated by thin air, fluctuating temperatures, and unpredictable weather. These features make the canyon an ideal destination for adventurers, but also pose risks for unprepared visitors. Over the years, Colca Canyon has attracted visitors not only for its natural beauty, but also for heartbreaking stories of people getting lost or in distress. For locals who are familiar with this harsh land, this is a place where nature reigns supreme. On March 30, 2011, a young couple, Ciro Castillo and Rosario Ponce Lopez, ventured into the canyon. Both were college students and had only been dating for a few months. Despite their lack of experience with dangerous hiking, they chose to travel alone, bypassing guided tours or group tours. Their goal was to reach the ancient Chimpa Fortress, an archaeological site overlooking the canyon. Their journey began in the towns of Chivay and Madrigal, where they stocked up on water and food before entering the canyon along a well-trodden trail used by other hikers. The route they chose was familiar, easy to recognize, and not considered particularly difficult, so it did not require any special skills. However, They underestimated the terrain's challenges and the effects of the high altitude. While Ciro had basic survival knowledge, they lacked vital navigation tools such as a global positioning system or an emergency beacon, and they had no clear contingency plan. Confident in their abilities, they carried only the essentials: water, food, and warm clothing, but overlooked potential dangers. This overconfidence would later prove to be a critical oversight. Initially, their trip seemed to proceed as planned. Witness accounts and photographs from their early days in the canyon depicted them as calm and optimistic. Yet, beneath this calm exterior, they were woefully unprepared for unforeseen challenges. In such rugged terrain, a single misstep can quickly spiral into disaster. Sudden changes in weather, rocky landscapes, and encounters with wildlife all posed serious threats they had not adequately considered. To complicate matters, they had not shared their exact itinerary with family or friends, nor had they established a reliable way to check in regularly. Equipped with limited communication tools, insufficient supplies, and an overestimation of their abilities, they faced mounting risks, a situation that would later have devastating consequences. The tragic story began with this trip, which shocked the entire nation and sparked a wave of controversy. At first, it was just a sightseeing trip in a stunningly beautiful area, but it quickly turned into a case that drew significant attention, with elements such as a mysterious disappearance, conflicting testimonies, legal investigations, and a public trust that was shaken. When Ciro and Rosario set out on their journey, no one, including themselves, could have imagined that only one would return. Ciro Castillo Rojo was born on May 16, 1984, in Lima, Peru. His father, Dr. Ciro Castillo Sr., was a well-known physician, while his mother, Rosario Garcia Caballero, was a homemaker. Although little is known about Ciro's early life, his love for the outdoors and his adventurous spirit were well documented. This passion led him to study forestry at the Agrarian University in Lima. During his time there, he met Rosario Ponce Lopez. Rosario, born on October 6, 1986, also in Lima, was the daughter of Eduardo Ponce and Maria del Carmen Lopez. By the time she met Ciro, she had already endured significant personal struggles. At 17, she became pregnant by a young man named Abbas. Although their romantic relationship ended, they remained in contact. Rosario began dating Ciro while he was still recovering emotionally from his breakup with Isabel Segura, who had described him as a kind and thoughtful person. Rosario, on the other hand, was dealing with emotional wounds from her own past. Despite this, their relationship was passionate and intense. They started dating in late 2010, and just 4 months later, they began planning a trip through southern Peru. Both were nearing the end of their university studies and felt they deserved a break. Their journey started with visits to Cusco and Puno before heading to Colca Canyon at the end of March. Ciro was especially eager to hike to the ruins of an ancient fortress, a plan Rosario enthusiastically supported. Their final stop before beginning the hike was the village of Madrigal, from where they prepared to climb toward Chimpa Fortress. The road to Chimpa was fairly easy to follow, with well-marked and well-traveled trails. Under normal conditions, the risk of getting lost was low. However, Ciro and Rosario made the unexplainable decision to leave the main path and take an alternate route. This decision turned out to be disastrous, leading them deep into an unfamiliar and more perilous part of the canyon from which they could not escape on their own. On April 4, 2011, while exploring the Colca region, they were seen by two miners, Tito Lupa and Miro Candori, who were working nearby. The miners reported that Ciro and Rosario seemed fine, showing no signs of distress or panic. Ciro even spoke to them, explaining where they planned to go. This was the last confirmed sighting of Ciro and Rosario together, both of whom appeared to be in good condition. But everything changed shortly afterward. That same day, Ciro's last confirmed communication took place. He and Rosario called her friend Efrain Matos, informing him they had lost the trail and didn't know their exact location. Ciro personally spoke during the call, but by the next day, events took a grim turn. Rosario's subsequent messages to Efrain no longer mentioned Ciro. She began sending distressed messages, saying she was lost and pleading for help. According to Rosario, on the evening of April 4, they decided to separate. Exhausted and unable to continue, she stayed in what she thought was a relatively safe spot, while Ciro went to seek help, heading toward what they believed was the nearest settlement, visible from a distance. Rosario said she never saw him again. After Ciro left, darkness fell, and the temperature plummeted. Rosario sheltered among rocks to endure the night. By morning, Ciro had not returned. Over the following days, completely alone, Rosario struggled to survive. With no food or way to navigate, she claimed to have lived off grass, bark, small insects, and water from streams. Her greatest challenges, however, were psychological, the constant fear of wild animals like pumas, and the overwhelming isolation. By April 6, even before Ciro and Rosario had been officially reported missing, 3 rescue teams and 14 trained specialists, along with local volunteers, began searching for them. Rescuers were hopeful the two were taking shelter in a cave or hidden among the rocks. But no voice, footprints, or other signs were discovered in the search area. The effort continued for nearly 2 weeks. Finally, on April 13, Rosario was found in the highlands near a location later named Cerro Fortaleza. Severely weakened, she was given emergency care on site, airlifted to a Red Cross clinic in Arequipa, and later transferred to a private hospital in Lima. Doctors said she suffered from severe dehydration, weight loss, eye damage from sun and wind exposure, and general exhaustion, but found no signs of a struggle or foul play. Rosario was stable enough to give her first statement shortly after being rescued. She stated that while she waited, Ciro had gone for help. Her rescue became a major news story in Peru, but skepticism quickly grew regarding her version of events since Ciro remained missing. The public grew wary of Rosario's behavior. Despite her ordeal, she displayed remarkable composure, showing no visible signs of emotional distress during interviews. Her calm, precise, and unemotional responses led many to question her sincerity, leading to speculation that her reactions were unnatural. Ciro's parents, particularly his mother, struggled to accept that their son could simply vanish without a trace. They placed their hopes on Rosario, the last person to see Ciro alive, expecting her to provide clear answers. However, her account remained vague and inconsistent. Ciro's mother claimed that, before Rosario was rescued, she had shared a different version of events during a phone call. Reportedly, Rosario mentioned seeing distant lights at night, which prompted Ciro to plan a trip in that direction the following morning. Rosario, citing exhaustion, chose not to accompany him. However, this account conflicted with the official statements Rosario made after being hospitalized. As time passed, more inconsistencies in Rosario's story surfaced. In various interviews, she provided contradictory details, sometimes stating that Ciro left in the morning and at other times saying he left at night. In some versions, there was a disagreement between them. In others, they made the decision together. These discrepancies raised suspicions among investigators and the media, leading to growing doubts about the credibility of Rosario's narrative. Public opinion began to shift, leaving the question looming. Was Rosario being truthful? Amid this uncertainty, Ciro's father traveled to Chile to join the search for his son in person. He actively cooperated with rescue teams and urged them to continue the search. Despite the expanded search area combed by police and military units, attention turned to Rosario's incomplete and puzzling story. By mid-April, with no significant progress made, Ciro's father wrote a letter to then-President Alan Garcia urging for direct government intervention and a more substantial search effort. The plea succeeded. The military became involved, providing helicopters, equipment, and high-altitude specialists. The National Police also deployed investigative teams specializing in serious crimes and missing persons cases. Search efforts scaled up rapidly, with 16 teams, including around 50 people, exploring an expanded area of the Colca Canyon. But the coordinates Rosario provided yielded no significant discoveries. In desperation, Ciro's father offered a cash reward to anyone with information about his son's whereabouts. The published phone number received many calls, but none yielded any significant leads. Authorities noted many false reports and scams, leaving most of the information at a standstill. Despite this, his father refused to give up. He worked on designing a new search grid, collaborated with government agencies, and enlisted the help of the Chinchis, an elite police unit skilled in navigating extreme terrain. These officers inspected the most inaccessible parts of the canyon, from caves and rocky formations to glacial areas and sheer cliffs. Weeks turned into months, yet no sign of Ciro. His belongings, or any physical evidence of his presence, was found. Every theory remained unproven, and the operation became the longest civilian rescue effort in Peru's history. As media coverage began to wane, Ciro's father persisted. He was determined to find his son, alive or not, and bring him home. During this time, he criticized Rosario for her refusal to return to Colca to assist in the investigation, citing emotional exhaustion as her reasoning. For Ciro's family, this was more of a way of avoiding responsibility. As tensions escalated, the idea of filing a formal complaint against Rosario, Ciro's last known companion, gained traction. Each day, Ciro's father continued to hope that rescue teams would deliver the long-awaited news that they had found him. Around this time, investigators uncovered video footage taken during the search. The footage showed Rosario attending a street celebration, looking relaxed, smiling, and dressed well, with no visible signs of illness or exhaustion. Alarmingly, the video was dated the same day. Her attorney claimed health issues to excuse her absence from legal proceedings. The public reacted strongly, and her image as a survivor of tragedy began to unravel. Doubts deepened, and many began to suspect that Rosario might be withholding critical information. As public pressure mounted, the prosecutor's office intensified its investigation. Under scrutiny, Rosario eventually agreed to participate in a reconstruction of the hike on the condition that her parents could accompany her. On the first day, however, her parents cited exhaustion and were unable to continue, leading to the reenactment being postponed. It was not until late August, during the second attempt, that Rosario joined investigators for part of the trail. However, this effort revealed no new evidence or leads. Her emotionally reserved demeanor during the reconstruction elicited mixed reactions from the public. Further skepticism arose when Rosario's mother publicly suggested that Ciro might have intentionally abandoned Rosario in the mountains. Although many dismissed this theory as far-fetched, it further fueled suspicions, particularly as hopes of finding Ciro alive began to fade. Despite lingering doubts and inconsistencies, the prosecution still lacked concrete evidence to accuse Rosario of any wrongdoing. By this stage, public perception of Rosario had shifted. It was no longer a straightforward story of survival. A critical aspect of the investigation centered on Rosario's camera, which investigators had been aware of since her rescue. However, the camera was not handed over to authorities until nearly a month later, and no independent forensic analysis was conducted during this intervening period. Only after mounting public pressure did Rosario's legal team finally surrender the device to prosecutors, leading to serious concerns about the delay. Why had an item that could potentially contain crucial evidence not been submitted immediately when the camera was finally analyzed by forensic experts? The high-tech crime unit discovered signs of possible tampering. The file structure had been disrupted, and 9 photographs were missing from the sequence. Rosario denied ever deleting or altering the images, but forensic analysts concluded that the deletions had been intentional. While the missing photos could not be fully recovered, their file numbers and timestamps appeared to place them during the time Ciro and Rosario were deep in Colca Canyon, one of the trail's most remote areas. Investigators speculated that these photos might have documented events contradicting Rosario's version of events. Additional suspicions arose from the remaining photos. Experts observed that the angles, shadows, and positioning of the camera suggested that not all the photos could have been taken by either Rosario or Ciro, prompting investigators to consider the possibility of a third person being present during the hike from the very beginning. The investigation then turned its focus to Rosario's personal background. Before dating Ciro, she had been romantically involved with Victor Cabrera, the son of her eventual defense attorney. In 2011, rumors began circulating that Victor might have secretly accompanied Rosario on the trip and concealed his involvement. These speculations gained traction as irregularities in the photos and the deleted images were mentioned as potential evidence. Years later, Rosario would marry Victor, but at the time, no direct evidence tied him to the hike. No witnesses reported having seen Victor or anyone else with Ciro and Rosario during their journey. Investigators were unable to definitively determine who might have appeared in the questionable photos or why images involving that individual had been deleted. Rosario continued to insist that she had not touched the camera after her rescue, but forensic evidence suggested otherwise. Officially, this theory remained unproven, yet it persisted in the public's imagination. Doubts about Rosario's honesty deepened, with many questioning whether she had truly been alone with Ciro at the time. The case took a critical turn months later. On October 16, 2011, more than 6 months after Ciro's disappearance, a search team discovered his remains near Mount Bomboa. His body was located on a narrow rock ledge in the Las Silas Cascade, one of the canyon's most difficult to access areas. This location was close to the area where Rosario had been rescued, but several hundred feet below the point at which they were believed to have separated. Earlier searches of this area had been incomplete due to its challenging terrain. The body was discovered curled in a fetal position. Ciro was barefoot, wearing only socks that showed significant wear and tear. Nearby, rescuers found scattered personal items along the slope, including a lighter, a hat, a scarf, and fragments of clothing. A bright red piece of fabric, believed to be part of his jacket, was visible on a rock. This distinctive color helped the search team locate the area from a distance. It took over 2 hours to recover the body, which was subsequently transported to Arequipa for forensic analysis. The official report identified the cause of death as multiple injuries sustained from a significant fall. Fractures were recorded in the skull, collarbone, right arm, and ribs. Experts concluded that the trauma was not instantly fatal. Ciro survived for approximately 8 hours after the fall, but ultimately succumbed to internal injuries and hypothermia. A key question is whether outside interference can be ruled out. The autopsy revealed no signs of blunt force trauma, weapon-inflicted wounds, or evidence of a struggle or physical restraint. Forensic experts concluded that the fall did not result from an assault by another person. Although this conclusion remains controversial, investigators closely examined the condition of Ciro's socks. The report noted small holes on the soles, likely resulting from the fall rather than prolonged walking over rough terrain. Furthermore, experts stated that if Ciro had been pushed or thrown, the distribution and extent of his injuries would have differed, with more severe internal trauma. Despite these findings, lingering questions remained. Why was he without shoes? Why was his body found relatively close to where Rosario had been located, yet undiscovered for months? How did extensive search efforts fail to locate him earlier? Investigators also acknowledged that a fall from a significant height could have displaced the body, complicating the evidence. The forensic report provided no definitive answers. Officially, Ciro's death was ruled accidental, potentially caused by a misstep, disorientation, or an attempt to descend in search of help. However, for Ciro's family and the public, this conclusion left many unresolved questions. Most troubling was the fact that Ciro died alone, and the only person who might fully understand what happened was Rosario. However, her account remained inconsistent, raising further doubts. Following the discovery of Ciro's body, investigators uncovered what they deemed critical evidence. Rather than closing the case, it led to a renewed phase of legal proceedings. The district attorney's office reopened the investigation, reviewing testimony, forensic reports, and digital data to determine whether Ciro's death was a crime or merely an accident. In October 2011, Rosario was summoned for further questioning, as authorities hoped her testimony might change or expand now that Ciro's death had been confirmed. She maintained her account, claiming that Ciro had left to seek help while she stayed behind, reiterating that it was a tragic accident. Around this time, prosecutors announced plans to conduct additional forensic tests and interview new witnesses. By December, investigators officially requested a 120-day extension to thoroughly review medical records, digital evidence, including photos from Rosario's camera, witness statements, and search operation reports. While accidental death remained the primary explanation, documents suggested that the possibility of external involvement had not been entirely ruled out. Amid this period of legal uncertainty, Rosario appeared on a televised interview to discuss the incident. Showing visible tension, she attempted a faint smile. When asked directly about the investigation, she said that he fell, that it was an accident, and that it was terrible, but true. The public reaction was overwhelmingly negative, with viewers criticizing both her testimony and her lack of emotion. In early 2012, Rosario's legal team requested the dismissal of all proceedings, arguing there was insufficient evidence of any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office asked the National Police to provide additional information. Around the same time, leaked audio of an interrogation appeared in the media, suggesting Rosario may have faced pressure from investigators. This prompted an internal review into the investigators' handling of the case. During this period, Ciro's parents continued to push for the investigation to proceed. His father openly criticized the prosecutors, accusing them of negligence and alleging that over 200 pieces of evidence, including indirect clues, had been ignored. He stressed that Rosario was the only person present at the scene when Ciro went missing, and her conflicting statements made it impossible to close the case without a full reconstruction of events and direct questioning. Despite public pressure and the family's demands, the prosecutor's office made its final decision in September 2013. The Second Court of Appeals in Arequipa officially closed the case, citing insufficient evidence to support criminal charges. This decision marked the end of the investigation. For Ciro's parents, the case's closure felt profoundly unjust. His father described the decision as a failure of justice and accused investigators of wasting valuable time and making serious mistakes. Conversely, Rosario's lawyer maintained that she had been unfairly targeted from the start, arguing that the accusations were speculative and lacked clear evidence. Thus, one of Peru's most high-profile investigations ended without trials. Charges. or resolutions, leaving many questions unanswered. Even after the case's formal closure in September 2013, public interest in Ciro's disappearance and death lingered. The investigation had ended, but debates persisted as theories, inconsistencias, and suspicions continued to circulate. At the heart of the controversy was Rosario, whose role in the case continued to attract attention and scrutiny. 2 years later, in September 2015, media outlets published photos of Rosario's wedding to Victor, the son of her former lawyer, Miguel Cabrera. The private ceremony, along with reports that Rosario was expecting a child, reignited public curiosity. Some have questioned Victor's connection to the events at Colca and have suggested that Rosario and Victor knew each other before she met Ciro, raising many unanswered questions. Ciro's family, particularly his father, never accepted the conclusion that his death was accidental. He always believed that the evidence was not convincing enough and that the investigation had missed many important clues. Ciro's father believed that his son's death was not the result of a random mistake, but was related to external factors. Rosario's public image remains controversial. While there is no direct evidence of wrongdoing, her actions, such as delaying the handover of cameras, deleting photos, and failing to cooperate at key points in the investigation, have raised suspicions. An interview in which she smiled tensely and participated in public celebrations during a time when she was reportedly emotionally distressed only fueled further public doubt. Legally, the case was closed. However, for Ciro's family and a large portion of the public, the investigation felt unresolved. Many believed the truth had been omitted from the official findings and that the real answers remained beyond reach.